This month on Spooky 30s, grab your boomstick because it's about to get groovy. Welcome to Spooky 30s, a podcast where I, Stella Cheeks, a 30-something of questionable taste, invite my friends on to turn me into the horror-obsessed fangirl I look like but never was. Each episode, my special guest picks a horror property that I just have to know. We watch it, read a bunch of cultural criticism, both peer-reviewed and publicly published, praise be to the internet scholars and the Tumblr historians, and then we have, hopefully, a super interesting conversation for your ear holes. My special guest this month is horror aficionado and critic Marcus Benjamin.
That's a lot to live up to. Okay.
You totally are, though. You literally write about horror and critique horror. It's it's on your Twitter byline. Come on.
That is true. I do write a lot about the scary movies. Yeah. And I do love scary movie season, which is all year in my house. So yeah. Hey people, this is going to be great. I love horror movies. Hi, I'm Marcus. It's going to be fun.
This is my favorite question to ask the whole time because I don't know why from when I started this podcast I made it so aggressive. But Marcus, how do you know me?
So for anyone who doesn't listen to all of the things that Stella does, Stella and I co-host a wrestling podcast.
75 podcasts that I have.
You're right. So we co-host one of the wrestling ones, and Stella and I work together, and I love Stella dearly. I actually started listening to Stella on Not Your Demographic, and I was like, oh, this woman's brilliant. Okay.
That's so and nice. Funny. I didn't know you listened to Not Your Demographic.
Yeah. I was like, she's brilliant and funny. Okay, cool. And then we started working together, and I'm like, oh, I love her even more now. And now we host a podcast together. So yeah. And now I'm here to talk about scary movies.
Our podcast very cleverly called Cage Side Seats, the podcast.
Because it is on Cage Side Seats, the website. So it only makes the sense.
Look, all the wrestling puns are taken.
People, if you're going to start a podcast, make sure that you have a nice group session where you and 5 or 6 of your friends realize that you can't come up with names. And then you just go with the most obvious one.
Honestly, we needed somebody like Sam Raimi to be like, give us a pun.
You're right. Oh, that would have been cool. Or just have Bruce Campbell come in and just like, hey man, just do something.
Give
me a thing. Yeah.
Do the thing you're doing. What is your relationship to the horror genre in general? Like you said you love it, but like how did you come to it? What does horror mean to Marcus?
So horror for me, really, this is going to be like a winding answer because it's multiple levels, much like horror itself. My mom got me into it, kind of. So my mom passed away several years ago, but when she was alive, and I was younger. So she passed away when I was in my early 20s. But when I was younger, she was always like, "Oh, let's watch The Leprechaun, or let's watch let's watch People Under the Stairs. Let's watch It." Asking your 4-year-old to watch It when it comes on, because it was for those of you who are clearly younger than I am and younger than Stella, it was a miniseries on ABC before it became this billion-dollar movie franchise. And
it was the first horror franchise that we did on this podcast. I don't know if you know this.
Very dope. See, there you go.
I read the whole damn book, Marcus.
I remember when you were reading the book. So yeah. And she was like, well, let's watch this. And I'm 4 years old. I'm like, no, I'm not watching that. Whatever I said as a 4-year-old was probably, no, I'm going to my room. And
I'm going to play with my Spider-Mans.
That's exactly what happened. Matter of fact, I found a picture of myself around that same age, like 5 or 6, wearing a Spider-Man t-shirt. So yeah, even then. And I was just like, no, I'm not doing that. And, eventually it became, hey, let's watch, even actually one time it was, hey, let's watch Scream. When Scream came out, she went to go see Scream. And I was like, I'm going to go see this movie with Daddy, whatever we saw, which I know was not Scream. And she was just like, whatever. So
I like that your mom tried to make you cool and you kept being like, Mom, I don't want to be cool. And she was like, God, my kid is such a lame ass.
That's basically what it was. She's like, oh, he's such a nerd. Oh, God.
But not like the fun nerd.
Right. And she's like, why won't he watch? There was a horror movie called Man's Best Friend about a killer dog. And I remember she went to see that. And it's like 93, 94. Me and my dad, my dad took me to see whatever he took me to see, some kiddie movie. And I was just like, yeah, I don't want to see the rated R movie about the scary dog. And eventually, though, we did start watching together. Like we saw Scream 3 together because of been like, like in the theater. Like we did watch Scream and Scream 2 on VHS together. Once I hit like 11 or 12, and I was like, okay, I was like, all right, cool. I'll meet you, Mom. I'll see where you are. And we went to see Scream 3. Neither of us liked it, but we did watch it together. And actually the last movie we saw together, very last movie we saw together in the movie theater was Silent Hill. So, which wasn't something I loved, but I loved seeing it with her.
Right.
And that was like the genesis of it. And then I really got into it in college, and me and my best friend kind of got into it together in college. So we would, call each other or text each other, be like, yo, did you see boom, 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 boom? I like just going on this list of like all these movies that we didn't see.
Yeah.
And, like I remember we watched Last House on the Left for some reason. And
because it's one of those ones that you just have to watch. That's like once you get into horror, as this whole podcast is, when you start to get into horror, people are like, well, here's the lexicon that you have to watch to be a horror fan.
Yep. Yeah. And so there was this Bravo special, and I still have it on an external hard drive, called The 100 Scariest Movie Moments from 2004. And he and I would watch that thing religiously. Like I still watch it every year. Every Halloween now I watch it. And it was just all these talking heads on Bravo before it was all reality TV. I mean, they used to show West Wing reruns on Bravo. That's how
they used to have a lot of docuseries, which were really good.
Yeah, they did. And now they're, just all watch what happens now. And they had this special with, Joe Dante was on it. John Carpenter was on it. Ron Perlman was on it. Felissa Rose was on it. Tony Todd, like just, all these horror luminaries, directors, producers, actors, sometimes marketing companies, like there's two marketing companies from Lionsgate talking about how they would, market these movies or just their impression of the movies. But my best friend and I was like, oh, okay, let's watch these movies on this list, starting from like 100 to, and some of them, I saw like Jaws, okay, I know Jaws, and like Alien. But, then there's stuff like Zombie, Lucio Fulci's Zombie. I was like, oh, I've never seen that. Or, Lucio Fulci's The Beyond. I was like, oh, I've never seen that either. Or Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace, which Joe Dante talked about.
Random words to me that I don't know, because you're going like, oh, I didn't know what that was, and I'm going, I literally don't know what that
is. but that's how I felt. Like you're watching all these. It was all these different movies from all these different eras. So it wasn't just the 80s, or it wasn't just America. It was Italian horror, which I adore. Now it was 50s and 60s horror, which we can look at now as kind of be like, oh, that's quaint. But for the time, man, it's always about putting yourself in that time. Or even hearing Rob Zombie talk about Frankenstein. He says, this is the 30s. And he's like, yeah, it's the 30s. Cool. But he said, but think about being in the 30s and watching some of those scenes.
Yeah.
With and when he says, I'm like, yeah, you're right. That would have been enough for me. Or a movie like Diabolique, which is a French movie that Hitchcock wanted to make, and he wasn't able to get the rights, et cetera, et cetera. So someone made it, sort of beating him to the punch. And I think that was his inspiration to do Psycho the way he did it. And just hearing Leonard Maltin talk about the reaction of people when they were watching Diabolique and giving some of them heart attacks in the theaters, or just the way people talked about The Exorcist. And it was just like, okay. So we went down this list and we watched all these movies, and that was it, man. Like I was hooked at that point. Like I watched all those movies and I was like,
you watched 100 movies.
Yeah, like not at once, because that would have been insane, but we did watch them over time. And I was like, all right, I'm a fiend now. This is my life's goal. Like, this is what I do. And I just love the genre so much, which is crazy, because thinking about one of the very first scary experiences I had was at this theme park in Largo, Maryland. So Largo, Maryland is in PG County, Maryland, which is a suburb of DC. This is where I live, PG County, Maryland. And there's a theme park. It was called Adventure World. It's now another Six Flags, because who doesn't have a Six Flags? And they had, so what was an Adventure World, they had this Halloween thing called Hallowscream. And my dad picked me up from school one day, like Halloween time when I was 8. So this would have been second grade. And I have my Sonic the Hedgehog costume, I'm thinking,
Oh my God,
we're
I'm
gonna.
imagining little baby Marcus as Sonic the Hedgehog. I love that.
Yeah, and it was like, it's the one with the little mask and just like the little jumpsuit where it just says Sonic the Hedgehog, or it's supposed to be his stomach or whatever. So I'm thinking, okay, we're gonna go trick or treat, and he's like, no, we're going to Howl-O-Scream. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And we get on this haunted train ride. So it's me, him, and I believe my two cousins. My two cousins, one of them was old, like, adult cousin, and then a cousin who was his son, but a little older than me. So obviously I was the baby, as the 8-year-old. We get on this haunted train ride, and it scared everything out of me. Like, I've never been that scared in my life. Besides just the haunted stuff, they had like Freddy and Jason, I'm using quotes, Freddy and Jason, like coming up the side of the train and like banging on it. And as an 8-year-old who, as I previously stated, stayed away from all of this stuff.
You're like, I've worked really hard to avoid all of these properties.
Right. And then it's just like, oh, nope, here they are right in your face. Got to deal with it. Scared me so much. I'm pretty sure I threw up. And
throw up in your Sonic mask.
I took the mask off at that point. I think I had on a coat because it was just cold. It was a cold night in October. And then from that to watching Halloween a couple years after that, and it just shook me. Like, Halloween is the first horror movie that really just shook me to my core of like, this is scary. Because with Jason and Freddy, even though they scared me at that ride, I was always able to say, well, that's not real though. Like,
right.
It's a guy like, Freddy's scary in my dreams, but I'll wake up, I'm fine. Jason's been killed how many times? Okay, cool. But the Michael Myers thing was just, well, this is just a guy in a mask and a knife. That's it. And it wasn't just that. It was also the music. The music in Halloween just terrified me. Terrified me. To the, now I have it on vinyl and I love it. But as a kid, it paralyzed me. And to go from all of that to now, I write about horror, and Bloody Disgusting, and I talk about horror incessantly. And I'm like, there's an 80s documentary. Like, I interviewed the director of this 80s horror documentary twice, once for part 1, once for part 2, and now he's working on a part 3. And I watch this thing pretty much all the time just because of, I'm like, I want to watch some, let's just put it on. And it's a 4-hour documentary, all these just 80s horror. It goes from 1980 to 1989. And there's a part 2 from 1980 to 1989. And I love it. I'm obsessed. Like, it is my thing. So
I love that when I said horror aficionado, you were like, oh, I have a lot to live up to. And then you're out here being like, here's this Italian director, here's this docuseries, here's this, that, and the other thing. Like, you didn't even mean to, but you're like, here are my credentials.
Yeah, it's really, it just happened that way.
It's really interesting because like I was really scared of horror stuff growing up because I had a couple things that I saw or experienced that I was too young to like process, like watching Scream 2 actually is what we figured out at like a sleepover, and I was like, ooh. I didn't want to see this, or ooh. Like Jaws as a kid, or even like I think I saw Chucky when I was like a kid, and I know Chucky's funny and stuff, but as a child who plays with dolls, it was really effing scary. And so I like but the thing for me is that I kept seeing clips of stuff, or I would watch something and close my eyes and then imagine everything, and so by virtue of only seeing clips of things, I actually made things a lot scarier for myself. And so it's interesting to like your thing with Halloween, watching it as a child and then going back and visiting it as an adult and being like, this is still scary to me, but I appreciate it in a different way. I know why it's brilliant. I can like think about it critically. Like as a child, you don't have those critical thinking skills. So you're like, this is fucking the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yep. And now, John Carpenter's my favorite director, like period, like of all time.
We're big John Carpenter fans here at Spooky 30s.
Yes, you should be. He is he there's a reason his Twitter handle is, the horror master. Like he is the master. That is my favorite director of all time. Halloween's my favorite horror movie of all time. The Thing is probably second. Like I love
The
Carpenter.
Thing is incredible.
I mean, even that, The Thing is my favorite movie to show to people. Like it's like, oh, if they've never seen it, I'm always like, okay, you got to watch this. I've never introduced it to someone who disliked it or never introduced it to someone who didn't have a strong reaction to it. You know, like, so everyone normally loves it, but when they love it, they just have like this visceral thing and they have to talk about it and they have to question it and they have to just be like, what did I just watch and what is going on? And it's just, and I'm like, well, that's Carpenter, man. Like
I remember
he's a one-man band.
When I was watching it for Spooky 30s for episode 2, if you want to listen to it, I was also writing in our work Slack because we work at Cageside, right? So we have our main wrestling chat, but we have a separate chat that's like the nerd chat. And basically, so I went in there and I was like, guys, I'm watching The Thing for the first time. This is crazy. And I remember all of you being like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then Sean specifically was like, what I wouldn't give to be able to watch The Thing for the first time again.
Yep. There's so many movies I have like that, and they're all horror movies. I think about Psycho. Like I wish we grew up in the era when Psycho was released. You know, I don't know if you know this little Hitchcock thing that he did, but Hitchcock said for Psycho, Hitchcock's rule to theaters, and you know you could do this at the time because this is when you only showed like two movies at a theater,
right?
And there were only but so many theaters anyway. But his instructions to the theater owners was, don't let anyone in once the credits start. Like once the movie starts, do not let anyone in. And they took a gamble on that. And that shock, that initial twist in Psycho is insane. But you know, we grew up in the era where we kind of all knew it through osmosis. Right. You know, like we know, like, oh yeah, okay. Because it's like
trying to watch The Sixth Sense without knowing what is happening. Like you can't. You just know what happens.
Right. Like even if you've never seen the movie, you know what happens at this point. I mean, Tiny Toons parodied Psycho. like you know what I'm saying? Like as a child, like I knew what Psycho was. The same with Jaws. Even if you never saw Jaws, you know what Jaws is. It's everywhere. And what I wouldn't give to just watch Psycho for the first time or watch Jaws for the first time or even Exorcist 3. Not The Exorcist, but Exorcist 3, just watch that for the first time because there is a really, really good scare in Exorcist 3 that even people who haven't seen Exorcist 3 know this scare. Like, I didn't see Exorcist 3 yet and I knew this scare. And I'm like, man, I wish I didn't know about this. I wish I was just in a bubble and I just watched Exorcist 3 one day and that scare happened and I just jumped off my chair.
After all of that, Halloween, Jaws, Paranormal Activity, what property did you actually choose to talk about and why?
So I chose Evil Dead because Evil Dead is a franchise near and dear to my heart because I love Sam Raimi, specifically Sam Raimi horror. So Evil Dead, a movie he did years after that, which I'm not going to talk about because that's not the episode. We're not going to do that. But and I also just love the franchise as a whole for different reasons besides Sam. You know, there's obviously Bruce Campbell. There is the incredible shift from we're making a very serious horror movie in early 1980 to 1988, we're making a horror comedy. And that amazes me so much. And then to go from that to we're kind of making an action movie with Army of Darkness.
A sword and sorcery movie.
Yeah. With the same director, same producers, same writers, same, nothing changed, but just the creative vision that the director and I guess the lead actor have. And I think Ash is singular and I know we're going to talk about this later, but Ash is singular for being one of the few male heroes we have in horror. He's singular for being very much like Jack Burton in Big Trouble in Little China. He ain't that great of a hero.
Yeah, he's an asshole.
Yeah, he's a jerk. He really only wants to do anything for his own benefit and gain. He's not really trying to save anyone. He's just trying to save his own ass. And if we all get saved in the process, cool, I guess. All right. And Sam, and just the things that Sam did from an innovative standpoint with his camera, with everything, and just where that launched everyone. And I know we're not going to talk about it, but I love the remake. Like I think the Evil Dead remake,
the one from 2013.
Yeah,
I haven't watched that one. Sorry.
That's all good. I think it is one of the best horror. Like remakes get a bad rap just because I think it's cool to just say, oh, remakes are bad. It's cool to do that. And
it's a lazy opinion.
It's exactly, and it's just lazy, right? Like, oh, they're remaking, and also a lot of people just love to hold on to their childhood. So I
Mhm.
get that. But horror has several dope remakes, and the Evil Dead remake is one of them. It is just as nasty and just as violent as the first film for 1980. Like it's taking, well, what was that movie in the 80s? Okay, cool. Let's do that for now, for the 20 teens. What does that look
Yeah.
like? And it does that, and it has a very effective protagonist. It has an effective story. It has a very effective reasoning for why they're at the cabin and why they don't leave the cabin. It just works. And I think every movie in this series, including the remake and the TV show, are very, very smart, and they don't speak down to their audience at all, ever. And they are horror movies, horror TV shows that understand what their purpose is and understand who their audience is, and know that their audience is just as smart as they are. So you got to give ironclad reasonings for things, and the things that you don't want anymore in your franchise or you want to excise, you got to give a reason for that too. Like they're just they're just very well done, and I'm kind of looking forward to the sequel whenever, or whatever this Evil Dead Rise thing is going to be whenever that comes out. Like that's another interesting thing where the remake was Mia as the main character, and then Evil Dead Rise is two other women now, two
Mhm.
sisters. So it's funny.
Family affair is what I read.
Yeah, yeah. So we've gone from Ash, as the jackass hero, to Mia, who was very sympathetic and not a jackass at all, and clear and was about her family and her friends and wanted to help them and wanted to save them, to now we're making that literal again with two sisters. So we've gone from this male energy, this faux male energy, which we're going to talk about, to very feminine things. And I think that's just really interesting and really cool, that Sam, and Sam's steered it every step of the way, either as a director or as a producer or just as a creative consultant. He's had his fingerprints on it every step of the way. Same with Bruce Campbell. And for the two of them to take this franchise 40 years in the direction they've taken it and stick with it for 40 years. A video game is coming out soon. To even do stuff like that is just really, really remarkable. And I think while Halloween is my favorite horror movie, the Halloween franchise is not my favorite franchise. I think the Evil Dead franchise outside of Friday the 13th is the most consistent horror franchise. And I know some people are like Friday the 13th. Yes, Friday the 13th is very consistent. Friday the 13th never lies to you about what it is. It never tries to be anything greater than what it is. It delivers exactly what you expect every single time. That's consistent.
The franchise thing is really interesting because when I talk to people about Evil Dead, people who would call themselves Deadites or whatever, like the like deep love of, because a lot of horror stuff has gone on and had tons of remakes and stuff. So people are like, oh, I love Halloween. I don't love the whole franchise, or like the first three are good, but the later ones, or even like for me now, I've seen, all of the Reanimator movies and I'm like, I love 1 and 2, 3 is an abomination. Like I even have those like opinions now too, but there is like a deep love of the whole thing when it comes to Evil Dead, which is, I think, unique in at least my estimation of like horror properties.
It is, and I think a lot of that is because it's one voice or two voices, however you look at it. Halloween passed from John Carpenter to Mustafa Akkad to now Jason Blum. Well, no, before that, Mustafa Akkad to Rob Zombie to now Jason Blum and David Gordon Green. So it's their lens, and Friday the 13th's gone through different people over time, but it's kind of remained consistent. But then you have something like Nightmare on Elm Street, which was Wes Craven, and then it wasn't, and then it was, and then it's
thinking about the episode that we just did in Spooky 30s, Hellraiser, right? Like you get Clive Barker's view, which is so distinct and so specific. And then people who've listened to the podcast know, like, I actually stopped watching them at 2 because I didn't want to watch any of the other ones, even though I know there are some that have fun things that people like, because I specifically like the Cenobites as anti-hero or as like, we're not good, we're not bad. We are literally like, the point is that we are both good and bad. We are we are violent and salvation. Like that's the point of them. So I don't want to watch a franchise where they become the capital V villains, because that to me ruins what the point of it is. So like I specifically was like, I stop here because I want Clive Barker's vision. I don't want anybody else's vision. Like that seems to be a common thing within like large horror franchises that
it is.
Evil Dead isn't.
Right. And that's why it works, you know, and it's also why a lot of horror franchises now are sort of going back to that well, you know, where they're like, hey, let's get the original director or the original writer, the original producer, whatever, and let's see if we can bring them back into the fold. You know, a masterstroke of Jason Blum was saying, let's just get John Carpenter.
Right.
You know,
or at least
bring him
have
back to
somebody as
Halloween.
producer. Like Clive Barker is
Yeah.
producing the new Hellraiser, or is at least a
Exactly.
consultant on it. He's still there to guide the vision. Sam Raimi is the producer on Evil Dead Rises, right?
Yep.
Like, or
Yep.
Rise, whatever, the
Evil
one that's
Dead
coming
Rise.
out this year.
It's Evil Dead Rise, and he directed the pilot episode of Ash vs. the Evil Dead. He produced all the episodes. Like he was there. He was hands on. He was hands on with the remake. He's going to be hands on with Evil Dead Rise. Like that's what you need. And I think it's different for Sam than say John Carpenter or Wes Craven, you know, R.I.P., or even Clive Barker. It's different for Sam because Evil Dead, despite the Deadites, you know, in mass, and despite the money the franchise has made, and despite all of that, it's still like this little thing that could, right? It never really became like Halloween. Like Halloween became a big studio thing.
Right. It still has a cult status, even though it has like a TV show and stuff. Even that TV show that had 3 seasons, I only watched the first season. I plan on watching more. It's just, you know, there's only so much I can read and write and watch before these.
You're only one person and you do like 50 gazillion things. It's fine.
Yes. Yeah. But like even that show that was on like a decently major network is still has like cult status. There is something about Evil Dead that still feels cult-like.
Right. It because it never became mainstream. You know, like Halloween became mainstream. Freddy obviously became mainstream. Pinhead became mainstream. You know, well, the Hellraiser movies were never.
He's
like,
the Hell
big
Priest.
movies.
His name is not Pinhead.
I'm sorry. You're right. but even to that point, like you said about you not wanting to see the Cenobites become the villains. The Cenobites became that because this was whatever studio owned them at the time. I believe it was New Line, actually. New Line, once they got ownership in Hellraiser 3, wanted another Freddy.
Yeah.
You know, like this was the era of Freddy, and that I get it. Like I don't like it, but I understand why they did it. You needed that mascot. You needed to make that mascot front and center. That's what people were coming to the movie. I mean, that was the thing that sold it. You know, when I would be in Blockbuster as a kid, seeing Doug Bradley's face with the I didn't mess with that VHS. I walked right past that. Like, nah, I'm not doing that. Nah, no. But for anyone older than me, obviously they were like, yes, I need this.
Dope.
I have to see what this is. Right? They have to see what it's about. Like you have to.
Well, the way that I do it too is like even the movies that I've watched that have scared me, because like there's stuff in Evil Dead, which I'll talk about, that do really scare me, that me doing all this academic research and talking about it, and it like demystifies it for me in a way that makes me fall in love with it in a different way. So like my relation to this property before I watched it for this is I had seen Evil Dead 2 in college, and I was mostly like confused by it because I was like, because people if you try and explain Evil Dead to somebody who's not a horror fan, you're like, okay, so it started off as like a low budget scary movie, but then people kind of thought it was funny, so they like remade it, but they didn't remade it, but they kind of remade it, but then they added a whole new storyline, and now it's a comedy, but also it's still really gory and is definitely a horror film. But also, there's like so many but alsos that it can be overwhelming to a new watcher, I think. So I think I got overwhelmed because I had somebody who really loved it show it to me, and that's always tricky, right? When somebody really loves something and shows it to you, because then they're like kind of like side-eyeing you while you watch it, like, do you love it like I love it? Do you love it like I love it? I imagine it's what it's like to watch Hannibal with me, where I'm like, so do you want to read the fanfic yet?
I mean, or watching anything Spider-Man related with me, you know?
Yeah, right.
So do you not love Peter Parker like I do?
Do you
if you don't, that means you don't love me. So
Yeah, you
did you
have
not
to leave
love
this
me?
house now. So I had that very distinct experience in college, and I wasn't really into horror stuff in college. And my friend was like, look, I know you're afraid of zombies, because that's like a kind of a big line for me,
Mm,
which is funny
mm,
because I've watched a bunch of zombie shit now and I'm still pretty scared of it. But he's like, oh, well, it's a comedy. It's a comedy. So I had this like weird detached experience with it. And also, in many ways, Evil Dead 2 and specifically, really, Army of Darkness is that kind of Monty Python humor, that
mm.
Terry Gilliam type humor, which is like, I respect people who love it. It's not my favorite. So it's also didn't like hit a lot of notes for me as somebody in college. I was just like, okay, whatever. But then also in college, a different friend was like, hey, I got tickets to see this musical. Do you want to go? And I was like, what? Sure, whatever. And he was like, it's Evil Dead. And I was like, well, I've seen the movie. It's not my favorite thing. And he's like, it's
Right.
free tickets. Let's just go. And then I went and saw Evil Dead, the musical. And I was like, well, this is incredible. This is so fun. Because the musical is when the like comedy clicked for me as somebody who had just watched it. Because that's the nature of a musical, right? It's so over the top. It's
Right.
so
Right.
ridiculous. The literal crowd gets like in Evil Dead 2, Ash gets like hit with the like blood hose, right? But the crowd
Mm-hmm,
gets hit with
mm-hmm.
like the blood hose in the musical, right? So that's when it kind of clicked for me, and I was like, oh, okay, I think this is good. But I never went back to revisit it. So it was interesting for me when you chose this, because I was like, oh, this will be one of the only franchises so far or movies so far where I have a previous relationship to. Like I think it's really interesting, and we'll talk about it more. But it's funny that the Scream episode and the Evil Dead episode are back to back, because both I have previous relationship with both of them, but also because of their metatextual nature, their like postmodern nature. It's very interesting to think of these two franchises that are really, really different, but have
Mm-hmm.
this like interesting overlap. So for this podcast specifically, I watched Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, and then I watched season 1 of Ash versus the Evil Dead. I haven't watched the 2013 remake, not because I don't want to, I'm going to, but just because that one doesn't have Ash in it. It's like I'm trying
Right.
to keep
Right.
the bubble. So for those of you who don't know, we're already very far in the podcast, but here is the movie synopsis for Evil Dead.
Oh, good. I was starting to feel like a real dick.
Ash Williams, Bruce Campbell, his girlfriend, and 3 pals drive into the woods to a cabin for a fun night away. There they find an old book, the Necronomicon, whose texts reawaken the dead when it's read out loud. The friends inadvertently release a flood of evil and must fight for their lives or become one of the evil dead. Ash watches his friends become possessed and must make a difficult decision before daybreak to save his own life in the first of Sam Raimi's trilogy. So that's obviously
Mm,
really basic, but that's kind of the first movie, right? The first
right.
movie it's on one level like very basic, and on another level like this like creative masterpiece. It's pretty
Yeah.
incredible.
And it's more incredible to me when I read stories or hear them talk about how we had no money. And just seeing, Bruce Campbell once said about Sam, because Sam was a former magician.
He was 20 years old when he directed this movie.
Right. So he's a 20-year-old and, Bruce Campbell's a baby. And, so they're 20, 21. They, they're high school friends. They gobble up money from different people around their town, like
From
even a
like
dentist.
dentists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. From a dentist. Like this is where they get money from to make this thing. And even then, it's not a lot of money. I believe they go to the Carolinas to shoot it, right? Don't they shoot in North Carolina or South Carolina?
I think they shot it in Tennessee.
Tennessee. Okay, I'm bugging. Okay, I'm thinking about something else. I think the remake was in Carolinas. Okay, anyway. So they shot it in Tennessee in a real cabin, mind you.
A real cabin with
And
no heat, no water,
yep,
no nothing.
yep, yep. Just torture. Bruce said that Sam made a lot of camera tricks that would normally cost, thousands of dollars. He did it on like, $5 because he was a magician. They invent this Steadicam, which they only did because they couldn't afford a shaky cam. They couldn't afford the actual thing that someone like John Carpenter utilized in Halloween with why am I forgetting the cinematographer's name? Dean Cundy. So the technique that Dean Cundy used with his shaky cam that was on his body and he moved around with it and then it became Michael's perspective. They didn't have that. So Sam puts 2 pieces of 2x4 together,
Just runs
wraps
around.
Right, wraps a video camera on them, and that's their cam, and that becomes the Evil Dead cam going through the woods and
Which
going
is the
over
like
things and under
one of
things.
the most iconic, like that. When people think of
Yes,
Sam Raimi, they think of that shot, right?
yeah,
That is the Sam
that's
Raimi shot.
yeah. And Quentin Tarantino said after he saw that, he was just like, "Well, why aren't we all using that?" It was just, it was like for Quentin, it was like a, oh no shit, yeah, duh. Why aren't all movies using this? And it's just because Sam was such a forward thinker and just thought so far out of the box. And they wanted to do this movie where, according to Bruce, they obviously, making a horror movie is always the easiest way to get into Hollywood. It's cheap, and they normally make a lot of money.
Well,
It's a
and
good
there
calling
is
card.
this like feral fan base. Like
Also that.
there is no other, what I'm finding in my reading and like also talking to people who love horror and like becoming a horror fan myself, is like there is no other group of film nerds that are
Mm-mm.
as feral or loyal or opinionated, or like there is this deep love for this genre that you never hear anybody be like, well, I'm like a really big drama fan. Like that's like I'm a really big biopic fan. I just love a
Yeah.
biopic. Like you say like I'm a horror aficionado. I'm a horror fan. Like I'm, you know, there is something like you want to put that badge on to be like, oh, I'm a
Yep.
film person, but I'm a horror film person. Like I'm better
Right.
than you.
And and to that point, something I realized about horror fans are the most, or normally in my experience, the most well-adjusted fans. And by well-adjusted, I don't mean that everybody's doing great in their own personal lives, but they're well-adjusted when it comes to accepting different opinions, right? Because even within horror, there's different opinions. So I there even within this franchise, let's keep it this franchise. There's an opinion of, hey, is it Evil Dead 1 or Evil Dead 2? Which one do you like more? Or which one is better? And horror fans in general, obviously there are always exceptions, but in general, they
Yes.
kind of are accepting of like, no, I like Evil Dead 1 because blah 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 blah. I like Evil Dead 2 because of blah 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 blah. And all right, cool. We don't need to fight about it. We don't need to.
Or let's talk about, I feel like what I've part of, I mean, at least for me, because I invite people on to talk on a podcast, but people like talking about their choices and their opinions and like, let me tell you why I feel this way. And it becomes more of a discussion. Like, obviously there are like
Exactly.
shitty fans in every fandom. We are working professional wrestling, but
Oh
like
yeah,
the
wrestling is
good
the greatest
fans
fans.
are great, like,
Yeah.
because there's a passion for it, right? Like, why do we like wrestling? Why do we like comic books? Why do we like horror? And I'm using we as in like me and Marcus. It's because there
Hmm.
is like this deep passion for it. And to be honest, when I was watching these movies, when I watched 1, 2, and 3, I liked them, and I was like, these are okay, but it's going to be really interesting to talk about this because like with these other episodes that we've done, I've had this like immediate connection to them. And I'm not having that with Evil Dead. And then I watched a series, which is when it started to click more for me because Ash
Mm.
becomes like a real person in
Hmm.
those.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
also reading about the fandom and reading about the mythos of like how it became made, I'm like really specifically excited to go watch them again. Do you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
this is the first time I've done research for this podcast where I'm like, oh, I want to watch this again immediately. Actually, I want to know how my opinion and my feelings are changing because they're the mythos of the movie and the Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, whatever, really does make me think about it in a different way and makes me like it in a different way.
And it's one of the few franchises where you can say that. Because sometimes the making of other ones becomes very messy. Like I mentioned Halloween earlier, where once you get past the first movie, which was just sort of a bunch of people getting together and making a movie on no money, and it becomes this hit, it then becomes corporation, and
Mhm.
it becomes just messier with this person involved and that person involved and this contract and that contract, and I don't want to do this and I don't want to do that, and why are we hiring this director? All of that. Evil Dead is just it is pure. It still maintains that purity, and the making of all of them is a story.
Right.
The making of every single one of them, the making of the TV show was a series. How it was supposed to be the fourth movie that never was, and they were trying to make this fourth movie forever, and they just couldn't get it done. And Bruce Campbell was like, look, man, I'm not getting any younger. We got to do this thing or we're not going to be able to do it at all.
Which
And,
is part of the
Sam,
best part of this series is how he's
right.
old and how they deal with the fact that he's old. Like the opening shot of episode 1 where it looks like he's strapping on the chainsaw or like, it's those iconic like kind of kung fu-esque style shots that they did in the movies. And then it zooms out and he's just putting on a fucking girdle. Incredible.
Yep.
Incredible.
And that's what I love about Ash is that I always looked at Ash as like a commentary on action heroes, right? Specifically of that era, 80s action heroes, which is a very...
Like a Rambo.
Yeah, like Rambo, Dutch, from Predator, Schwarzenegger. It's a very specific type. Big, beefy guys, always have the good one-liners, always have the good quips. They're not scared of anything.
And they're super proficient in all of the things
Yes.
that they need to be proficient in to save the world or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Like it just so happens that Dutch happens to be a good soldier and he's fighting a predator who is also a soldier. What are the odds? And Ash is just very much a commentary on all of that and just saying like, well, yeah, but what if they're kind of dumb or just kind of jerks?
I love that. I love the idea because at first when I was just watching the movies, I was like, okay, these are funny, and Bruce Campbell is obviously super banging hot. Like that helps. Like he's got
Bruce
a chin
Campbell's
made for
Bruce
some
Campbell's
very specific activities. Let me just say,
Bruce Campbell's a fetching man.
even with the
definitely.
unibrow.
Yeah. It's a handsome guy. Yeah.
But he I think I read in an interview with him or like something, he was like, Ash is a dumbass. Like Ash is an idiot. Ash is an ass. Like that's his whole thing. Like he is uniquely selfish. Like he goes in Army of Darkness, he goes back in time and they're all like, you're our savior. And he's like, I just want to get back home. Like fuck all of you guys.
That's it. Right. And you're like, hey man, in order to get back home, you need to say this thing the right way.
And he's
yeah,
like,
yeah, I got it. Yeah. He says it wrong, of course.
Because he didn't listen, because listening is beneath him. He's a man. He doesn't have to listen.
And are all men from the future braggarts like you? No, baby, just me. Like that's his whole thing. It's just him, and it's all about him. Or when they keep saying, "Hey, man, help us out." Like, please help us. We're going to get attacked. And he's like, all right, fine. I'll do it if you send me back. I did my part, just like in the deal. Send me back home. Like, that's all he's worried about is send me back home. And at the end of it, he doesn't change.
No.
There's no growth for Ash.
He is a uniquely American hero in that, like, he is being told by everybody around him, you're an asshole. And he's like, whatever.
I don't care, man. Like, yeah, but I'm
sure,
going
whatever.
Home, right? Yeah.
He it's not even that he buys his hype. It's that he's like too dumb to realize what. But the thing that works about him, that specifically works for me in the TV show, especially how we see him interact with people who are younger than him. We see him interact with a bunch of different women. We see him act with people of color. Like he is not mean-spirited at all.
No, he's jerk.
He's a jerk because he's an idiot.
Exactly. But right. Yeah, Ash isn't mean.
Yeah, he's not mean. He's just dumb.
Yeah.
And like when it comes down to it, he does want to save himself first, but he will save you. And then his growth, at least in season 1, is he starts to like the fact that I can't remember her name, but one of the main girl in it, she gets possessed, right? And he doesn't just kill her. He helps to like exercise her. Like that is a huge turning point for him because even earlier in that season, we see both of her parents get possessed, and he's like, "I don't give a shit that they're your parents. Well, we gotta fucking kill them. I killed my sister once. I don't give a shit."
Right? Yeah, I killed my sister. I killed my girlfriend. Like, it is what it is.
Kill my girlfriend twice, maybe.
Yeah.
Like that's when he starts to become like a fully fleshed out person, and that's when I was like, "Oh, I love this dumbass." Like. I really love this idiot.
It works for that because, and I forget whether this is season 1 or whether this is later on season 2 and season 3. They really do show like, okay, well, this is why this guy is this way.
Yeah.
It's not just him being a cocky dumbass for the sake of being a cocky dumbass. There's some real pathos there, and it's not a lie because it's Evil Dead. They're not gonna.
Right.
It's not
Because it
Shakespeare.
really is a show about one-liners and shooting zombies in the head with, or chopping them up with your chainsaw hand. Like, we don't want to
Right.
get away from the heart of it, but you know,
it's
character development is good.
they're not trying to be The Wire, but they are going to at least give you like, hey, here's why this person is, and a lot of it, like pretty much all of us, has to do with his parents. While also just thinking, well, how would you feel if you were in this town and you had to kill your girlfriend, you had to kill your sister, you had to kill your other friends, you came back, you went into the past, had to save the world there, you come back to the future, not the movie, but the present, and then tell everyone all these things that happened, and also, by the way, your girlfriend's missing, your sister's missing, and everyone
Your
blames you
hand
for
is
all this.
missing.
Your hand is missing. I
Not
would
to
definitely have a big chip
mention,
on my shoulder.
totally, not to mention the fact. So there's all of that. So like his bravado is something that just like keeps him alive, both against the Deadites, but also like in our mundane everyday world. But also like, think about the amount of times that he had to fight himself. Right? Like, it is played for comedy, and those scenes are hilarious. Like when he has to like chop his own hand off, and then he puts the farewell to arms like on it, and
That's
when
hilarious. I love that
it's
moment.
so
You did
good.
that too. Love it.
It's so good. Or in the first movie where he like sees himself in the mirror and gets choked by himself in the mirror, or in the third one specifically where he like eats little versions of himself and then
right, and then has to fight a dead version of himself that's decaying. Yeah,
and then another like something grows out of him and he's like, oh, you're bad Ash, I'm good Ash. Like the fact that this man has had to literally fight himself, has been decentered as a self in his own narrative. He can't, in many ways, trust that he is not growing another person, or not gonna have to fight himself again, not gonna have to like wake up one day and his other hand is gonna attack him. Like he lives in a constant state of, I can't trust myself, I can't trust anybody else. And then on top of that, which is like, I mean, I can't trust myself, I can't trust anybody else, is like foundational horror, right? Like that is, that's the thing.
That's Cronenberg. Like
that's
all
Cronenberg.
Cronenberg is about not trusting yourself, not trusting the people around you, and how the lack of trust you have in yourself is going to manifest and make it worse for the people around you.
Right. I mean, that is like, obviously these movies are zombie movies, so there is like a lot of body horror and like whatever. And we see Ash get possessed. We see so many things happen to Ash's body. And ultimately, he walks out okay, except for the fact that he lost his hand. But he has been completely decentered in his own reality. He goes back. Everybody thinks he's a murderer. Also, the things that happen to him are wildly fantastical. So you have to believe that there's a part of him, especially when we meet him again in the TV show where he's so much older, that is like, am I fucking crazy?
Right. Yeah.
Did I go into the past? Did I shoot zombies, or did I lose it and kill my girlfriend? Like, so that bravado is like the only way he probably can wake up in the morning, or to like be a semi-sane person. Like that bravado, in many ways, like how it is in reality, is like a fucking shield. That's the only way this man can exist.
It's also a commentary on the fact that now he can't have an actual relationship with anyone.
I don't want friends because my friends die.
Exactly, which is why it's growth for him in this TV show to have a little Scooby gang.
I love the Scooby gang in the TV show.
Yeah. It is growth for that guy. So there's also, there's what you said about not killing the girl when she's possessed, but it's the fact that he's attached enough to even be able to even think about that. Because this is a man who
or to be
attachment.
Persuaded. Because he does have to be persuaded to do it. Because he sees his friend be like, I love her. She's my friend. Like, we can't just kill her.
And that's the thing. He sees his friend do that. This is a guy who's now okay with making connections. He's okay with someone looking up to him. Because they both look up to him as like a father figure, kind of, sort of. He's okay with having that responsibility. And Ash is not someone who wants responsibility at all. And it is, and that's why I said like it's a commentary on that action hero of that era. What would happen if they got older? And I think the TV series looks at that really well, because a movie like Die Hard, for instance, is also about an everyman. You know,
Mhm.
John McClane would be the closest to Ashley Williams in terms of action hero horror movie. The everyman who's also got quips, who's thrown into ridiculous situations and somehow survives them. But
John McClane's also a cop. He at least,
eh,
and in this fictional universe, has like training
yeah,
and knows how to do
right.
things. Ash is a retail worker. That's like the best
Well,
song in the
hey,
musical is like, how did I fall in love with the best girl in the world? And she's like, how did I fall in love with the retail manager? Like
hey,
that.
don't forget when you shop smart, shop S smart. All right, that's all I'm saying. But the cop thing aside, it's still this whole thing where it's a guy who's just thrust into these situations and
True.
becomes basically a Superman the more the situations go on.
Flipping cars and
Whereas,
shit.
yeah, and he's on freaking helicarriers. I mean, he's on jets, whatever. Like John McClane became less John McClane and more Superman the more the series went on. Whereas Ash really does get to deconstruct what would happen to that John McClane type person once the parade is over.
Mhm.
You know, like once your heyday is over, now what are you? And I think
And John McClane's relationships are still, for the most part, alive, though. That's the difference, too, right? Like he's got
yeah,
an ex-wife, and yeah, she's an ex, but like they still have like, oh, if only our love, blah blah blah. And I think he's got children by like the
he's got
fourth
two
one,
kids.
right?
Yeah, he's got
Yeah,
two kids, and he has a strained relationship with every single
but the
person inside he has a
relationships are
strained
still
relationship with.
there. Ash is
Yes,
alone. He has like a
right.
weird relationship with his like neighbor his old lady neighbor who he flirts with, so she does his dishes. Like that's the
And
and his coworkers where he like acts really cocky. But I think it's also really important that in the beginning of the Evil Dead series, he's been there the longest, but he's also still not the manager. Like he can't even
mm,
handle being in charge of other people at the store.
again,
He's
the
like, I can't be
responsibility
in
thing.
charge.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
doesn't want the responsibility. Like he
totally.
wants, and that's such a difference from who Ash is in Evil Dead.
Right. The
You
first
know,
one. I
if
was
we're gonna
just going to say that.
yeah, if we're gonna talk about these movies, you know, one of the things that fascinates me is the difference between the first movie and the second movie, not just in tone, but just in terms of character. You know, Ashley Williams, you know, because he's Ashley Williams in the
Yeah.
first one, for real, for real. He's not really Ash.
Ashley.
Yeah, is not Ash Williams from Evil Dead 2. Like they're two different people. You know, Ashley Williams is meek and he's quiet and he's, you know, he's the
He's the good boyfriend who bought
I
like
was
a
about to say
weird
that.
necklace for his
Yeah,
girlfriend
yeah,
because she
he's
loves teeny tiny fine print, I guess.
he's
It's
hey
the
man,
dumbest necklace. It's literally like Sam Raimi was, I know this is just me making up a headcanon, but Sam Raimi was on side and was like, maybe we should add a scene where they're like nice to each other so like people have more emotional resonance when she dies. Does anybody have
when
like a
she dies.
necklace? And people are like, we could make a necklace. We have this crap. Like it's the worst necklace.
Hey man, when you're making a movie on a shoestring budget, even the actual shoestrings have to look ridiculous, and a necklace is a shoestring. And Ashley is the guy who presents it, and he's earnest, he's honest, he's
He's a good
decent.
brother.
He's a good brother. He's looking out for his sister. He's looking out for his best friend. He's looking out for his girlfriend. Like he just wants everyone to be happy.
Yeah.
He seemingly is on a good path in his life. You know, he's young. He's got a little bit of a career that he's trying to get started. His
He's got a
sister's
pretty
going to
neat car.
Yeah, you know, like they're all. It is the very typical. Hey, we're a bunch of teenagers or early 20s going off to set on this adventure, and then something bad happens.
He's sweet.
Yeah, and that's not who Ash is in Evil Dead 2
It's
at
super
all.
interesting because like especially since he is like for lack of a better term the final guy in the first one, like he's left alone. He had to kill all of these people that he loved, but he did it in a way that was the difference between like a survival kill, right? Like I'm killing you because you're trying to kill me and I'm scared and whatever, and like and then the difference of like I am actively being a action star and I'm killing you because I have to, but also I'm doing it in a very aggressive way. It's defensive versus aggressive. And in the first one, he's
Right.
very defensive. He literally gets like thrown into several bookcases. Like, I don't know, like several bookcases. But in the second one and then on, he is an action star.
And even in the first one, he's manipulated. Like they're
Yeah.
manipulating him in the first one.
Oh, by his sister
when
and
they're
his girlfriend.
yes, they're both like, once the demons possess them, he's fodder. He is emotional fodder for them. Like
I
Ashley,
That's the thing
and
I love about the Deadites is how petty and mean they are throughout the whole thing. They are the pettiest, shittiest little demons. Like, I think that is part of the reason why that's definitely, there's so many reasons why this is like a big franchise, but like the difference between seeing like a mindless zombie or like a demon that's like, I'm from hell,
Yeah.
and then a demon that's like willing to taunt you is like, there's something fun about that. Like these
Yeah,
mean-spirited little
who, who,
assholes.
who are willing to tell you they'll swallow your soul. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, that's a
and that
lot.
they're creative. They're like, what if I possessed a doll? That'd be really fucking funny, right? Like,
Yeah,
you can
or
imagine
like,
the Deadites being like, wait, watch what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna pretend to be him. Come on, this will be really good. Like, you can imagine behind the scenes the Deadites all just like laughing at like Ash.
well, I mean, I'd laugh at him too if I possessed his girlfriend and his sister. Like, well, what's the best way to get him? Oh, let's get them.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Let's do that and let's fuck with him because he's not going to kill her. He's not
It's
going to
like
kill the sister.
Right. It's like they looked at the group, like the Deadites looked at the group and they were like, who would be the most fun to fuck with? Oh, this sweet little baby boy with the unibrow.
Right. Because, and I think if we wanted to say there's some character progression there, it's Ash sort of realizing I can't be that anymore.
Yeah.
And obviously it doesn't work that way because the logic between part 1 and part 2, you'll go cross-eyed.
Yeah, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Let's just focus on one.
But just if he made it out of that cabin at the end of Evil Dead 1, if he was able to make it out, and there's different opinions as to whether he survived or whether he didn't survive. I don't think he would have been the same. I think he couldn't have been. No one's the same after something like that. But I do think eventually the Ash that leaves that cabin in Evil Dead 1 would become the Ash that we get in Evil Dead 2. At least the bravado, tough guy part of it, because he would have to protect himself. I don't know if he would have been as cocky and quippy.
I think he would have definitely been harder. I think he would have been a little bit of an asshole, but I don't know if he would have been had that like as like bravado-y as he is. He wouldn't have been like, I think he would have just been an asshole to like protect himself so people wouldn't get close, but I don't know if he would have performed masculinity in the way that like Ash from Evil Dead 2 performs it.
It would have been a stretch to get there, and I think the thing that would have made it, I think it's different if his. I'm trying to think. Well, what is the configuration of survivors to get him to that point?
Like, I think what it is, it's not the surviving or whatever. But if you think, okay, so Evil Dead 1, right, is filmed as like an actual horror movie. It's supposed to be scary. It is scary, I think. I actually do think it's quite scary. There are some parts that are funny in that way that sometimes when something is so scary or so ridiculous, like it jerks you into laughing a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
But I think Evil Dead 1 is actually pretty scary. And there are some really, like, some of the like all of Sheila's like basement makeup stuff, like she looks fucking gross. Some of the like the Sam Raimi like quote, show everything. Like even if you're like, okay, that's like grits, I guess, but like it's still gross and visceral. Like I didn't want to eat food after watching it. And also like that scene, the scene with his girlfriend, that scene's fucked up, man. Of her being like, she's really, and that's a scene that like, it could be funny because she's like, I'm like a little baby doll girl, la la la, and could easily be funny, but the acting in that movie is not the best because they were like children, but she's good specifically in that moment of being this like creepy doll, like whatever, that's so different from her, what we've seen. And then when she switches back and is like, no, Ash, it's me. Like that scene is emotionally manipulative and really fucking sad and scary. Like it sucks. Like, and then he has to chop her head off. Like that's fucked up. Right. But then, you know, some people saw the movie and they were laughing, and Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi, to their credit, were like, well, fuck, fine. Like, if people are laughing, like, we just wanted a reaction out of people. So, like, let's just lean into it. And so the fact that Evil Dead 2 is now specifically a comedy, think about the way in which Linda died, or like her name's Linda, right?
Yep, that's what. Yep.
Okay. Linda dies. When her head gets chopped off in the second one, he has to watch her do like a ballet act, right?
Yep.
And the way that
she does the
people,
whole claymation thing, yeah.
the way that people die and stuff are so patently absurd in the second and on one. It's like the only way to answer it with it is absurd bravado. Like, you answer absurd with absurd, whereas in the first one, there is like an actual
earnest.
Scary. It's earnest, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
it's even the scene in the basement that is super dope cinematically, even if it doesn't really make sense in the movie, where like the light bulb fills with blood and blood is coming out of the that is scary. That's fucked up.
The thing in the first movie that always got me is the pencil to the ankle.
Wow, like, that is one of those moments that could be like, ha, 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 ha. That's a scared laugh.
Yeah, because it's not just the pencil to the ankle. It's a pencil to the ankle and then watching it dig into the ankle and then dig stuff out. I'm just like, yo. And I think this is where I'm going to get into a little Italian horror stuff. I think Sam's ethos of show everything really does stem from that Italian horror group. Bava, Fulci, specifically Fulci. Why am I forgetting my other guy's name? Argento. Good Lord. Just their...
Come on, even I know Argento.
Yeah, come on, dude, get it together. Like, they were influenced by American audience, by American filmmakers, and the filmmakers, the younger American filmmakers like Sam Raimi at the time were influenced by them. So, Sam's influenced by a movie like Zombie. He's influenced by the stuff that they were doing over there and just willing to show everything, willing to not yell cut at all, and willing to just show as much viscera as possible and intestines and whatever else, and just but they did it in a way where it was not only nasty but also beautiful to look at and
creative, right? Like, the fact that they didn't have a budget in Evil Dead 1 and they were like, I don't know, let's get milk and grits and blood and corn syrup and like, we'll just mix it all together, it'll be gross.
Right, and that was the whole thing. It's we part of the 80s aesthetic, not aesthetic, but part of the 80s ethos is, look, if you don't have a lot of money for your horror movie, then you have to be memorable, because the audience is you're competing with not just the movie that you think you're competing with the movie that's coming out a week from now. Right. A month from now. Like, there's just a
horror, especially movies. In the 70s and the 80s, when it comes to movies, but even specifically when it comes to publishing, like novel publishing, but then also when it comes to movies, there's a glut of it. Like you said, like the 70s and 80s is heyday of horror writ large as a genre.
Yep. Yeah. And if you're going to be out there, man, you got to swing for the fences. So they swung for the fences. They didn't have a lot of money. So what it lacks in character, in terms of, because I don't think any of the characters in Evil Dead, the first one, are that memorable for real. I don't remember the characters. I remember the gore. I remember the scares. I remember the monsters. Like, that's what they're going for. I remember the setting. I remember everything else. I remember the shock of, it's a scene that shouldn't have happened. It's a scene that definitely.
I was to say, are we going to talk about it? Like, because to me, the only memorable character in the first one to me is actually the sister, because we see her have this internal character of her like drawing and the creepy like clock and her hearing like, join us, and like we see her terror, right? We see her why she runs out into the woods, and then she gets assaulted in the woods. Like, we see this really, we see her get raped by a tree.
Yep. Yeah, and even that, like, so I know Sam said, hey, if I could do that again, I wouldn't do it. And he's not the first director specifically of this era to say, if I could take something back, I would do it. I
would take back a sexual assault by a tree.
Yeah, like Carpenter's talked about the scene in a movie that I love, and I'm saying Assault from Precinct 13, where he has a little girl get shot in the forehead while she's trying to get ice cream. Like, that's just what happens. And he says, yeah, I would not do that again. and it's these young filmmakers just being like, what's the most shocking thing I could do?
Right. I mean, Sam Raimi was
And
20, a 20-year-old, like, shitty dude. Like, all
right.
dudes, no offense, all people when they're 20 are shitty, but especially, like, a white dude when he's 20 is gonna be shitty.
I have no experience being a 20-year-old white dude, but I can tell you as a 20-year-old black dude who was 20 at the time when I did. Yeah, like we're not the most evolved.
Yeah.
And especially when you're trying to make your mark in, like we just said, in an arena where everyone is making their mark, there's like, all right, man, I gotta go for it. Let me just do this gigantic, huge, stupid, very ignorant thing. And while
But
it
it's a
is
scene that
technically
people think about still,
right,
like,
yeah, and what I was gonna say,
for better or worse.
while it is clearly not done in good taste, and I'm not a person that believes horror has to quote unquote be good taste. Because a lot of bad things that happen to people are horrific and they are not in good taste. That's the nature of the beast. I mean, the movie's still about people getting possessed, which is going to lead to people saying and doing things. We talked about it. It's going to lead to Deadites being shitty. It's going to lead to Ash. Ash isn't a great person, but the point is, even without that, it's technically really, genius the way
Yes.
Sam figured out how to do it. I'm not advocating for doing it, but if you're going to do it, he found a way to make you be like, yo, what? How did you do this?
Yeah, I think that
Um,
the biggest problem for me is that, like, that scene is shot in a way that is, like,
yeah,
eroticized. Like,
yeah,
it's not
it's voyeurism. Yeah.
right. I mean, I don't need sexual assault to motivate any of my characters that I'm in media that I'm watching. I'm just like, I really don't need that. But, like, if it's presented as something being horror versus something being erotic is, like,
Mm,
that is a very fine line in many ways. And this one, like, the shot of her, like, breast with, like, it is presented in an erotic way that is like, yeah, this is not serving. And it also, like, if you think about how we talked about the Deadites about being, like, petty and stuff, like, think about the silly shit that they do even in the first one.
right.
The rape scene feels violent
It's
in a way
tonally
that
off. It's
it's
off.
tonally
Right.
off. It doesn't
Yep.
fit.
Mhm.
Even if it,
Yeah.
like,
And
it's just a weird scene. But
it,
speaking to, like, characters, like, again, Sheila is really the only person that we get to see a lot of stuff from.
mm,
Like, she is the only one that, to me, that's, like, actually kind of a character.
I don't even remember I've seen his movie several dozen times. I don't even remember Homeboy's name. Like the
Scott?
yeah, maybe it's probably Scott. Someone's
I'll
gonna
look.
yell and be like, "It's definitely Scott."
I have the notes. It's definitely Scott. It's
Okay,
Ash, Cheryl, Scott, Linda, and Shelley. And I
okay,
have been
cool.
saying Sheila.
Shelly, yeah, Shelly's the sister. It's all good.
Whatever.
They'll get it in
Sheila,
post.
Shelley, Cheryl. That's all. It doesn't matter.
But to your larger point, it is a movie. It is a scene in the movie that doesn't belong because it doesn't serve a purpose
Mhm.
other than to fill the quota of it's the 1980s and we need breast.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much it.
Can't make
Like
a
that.
horror
That's it.
film without boobies.
And that's right. And that's it. And it doesn't help. It doesn't help her out at all. It
Mm-mm.
doesn't motivate anyone else. It
Because then
doesn't.
they all are actually, like, tree rape deniers to her.
Right. They're all just
So
like,
then
"Yo, you're bugging."
they all are kind of positioned as being assholes. Is like,
Yeah.
you
No
must have
one
just
believed her.
fallen down. Even though she comes back looking crazy,
Yeah.
like she's been attacked by the woods. They're like, you must have just fallen down. You're a weird artist. We don't know what you're like.
You made it up. Leave us alone. We have other things to do. Thank you. Like that's all that is. And when the film, so I have a thing with horror though. One of my rules is if your film doesn't justify the horrific things that happen, then you need to take them out.
Right, because then it's just
Yeah.
horror. Like, we have these elemental questions on this podcast, like, is the horror on top of the plot, or is the plot dependent on the horror? And, like, that is horror just on top of the plot. Like, it's just like the
Hmm.
horror is there, it doesn't serve a purpose. It's not actually there to motivate the characters or to
Mm-mm.
move the plot along. It's just there for shock element because we
Right.
wanted you to come to a horror film.
A-
That's
As
bad
opposed
horror.
to like Last House on the Left, where there is it's not a tree that does it, but there's a rape scene, and it is purposely not done in a It's not done in a fancy way. It's not done to look good. It's not done to titillate you at all. It's done to look as horrific and abhorrent and uncomfortable as that must be.
Because it
And
is. That is like our actual real life horror, right? Like you go to these
right,
movies and you watch like ghosts come out of TVs and like whatever, and like that is fake supernatural stuff. But in the real world, the horror is a guy with a knife or a guy doing a sexual assault. Like that's why those type of movies are scary in a different way, right? It's touching on real fears that people have.
yeah, and then it's used to motivate. It used to further the plot. Like it becomes motivation for the parents later on.
Not that
This
that sexual assault should ever be used as
No, no,
motivation
no,
for
no, 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 no,
characters, but
no,
I get
no,
what you're
not at
saying. That
all.
movie was made, like, a really
Yeah,
long time ago. I just feel like
yeah, it was.
constant caveats for this is
Yeah,
necessary.
yeah, and it's also, again, what's the purpose of your movie?
Right.
The purpose of Last House on the Left was to be a political statement about Vietnam and violence coming out of people that you never think it could come from, and a society that becomes desensitized to violence.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What is the purpose of Evil Dead? None of those things.
The purpose of
Therefore,
Evil Dead is we are a bunch of kids who love making movies and specifically love horrors and horror movies. We want to break into the film industry. Let's make a horror film. That's the purpose of Evil
exactly.
Dead.
Right. So when you do something like that, you're really doing it, one, like I said, for the marketplace, and two, to show off. To show
Yeah.
off, hey, I'm this new young hotshot filmmaker. Look what I can do. And it is unfortunate that that scene is there, because I think it takes away from it becomes the talking point of that movie. Like, there are two big talking points for the first Evil Dead: that scene and the fact that it's not Evil Dead 2.
Right.
And and I think the first thing, that rape scene, takes away from all the ingenuity that exists in that first movie. It takes away from all the, like you said, the legitimate scary things that exist in that first movie. It takes away from the honesty of that first movie, of
Yeah.
just being like, yo, let's just do this plain horror movie, and we're going to use clay. We're going to use clay and, like you said, grits and whatever else we can find, and we're just going to figure it out, and we're going to string together a pretty cohesive plot. Like, it lines up pretty well. It's like, all right, they get to the cabin. Someone goes searching in the cabin, because of course they do. Someone finds something in the cabin that they weren't supposed to find. Of course they do. Someone reads from this thing. Of course they do.
Well, to be
And then
fair,
that
they listen to a tape of somebody
listen
else
to
reading
it.
it.
Right, fair. So someone plays a tape that they shouldn't have played. Of course they do.
Yeah.
And
Don't
then the
play tapes
bad
that you
things
find in a
happen.
scary basement.
Never, 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 never. Matter of fact, not even a scary basement. If you find tapes anywhere that are unmarked, I don't
Don't
care
play
whether it's a basement, I don't care whether it's Target, don't play it. Because there's a
Haunted
chance.
Target.
Look, there's a chance somebody put something on there. There's a reason the tape's not labeled. All right, that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. When I find tapes,
This is
I
a
was
trap.
yeah, exactly. When I was cleaning out a closet the other day, and I found a bunch of tapes that are unmarked. I ain't playing them. Nope. I don't know what I put on those tapes. Younger me could have set me, older me up for a trap. I'm not getting involved in his
Definitely
nonsense.
put a bunch of spells on this tape.
Yeah, I'm sure I did. Just to be like, I'm gonna find this in like 20 years and mess with myself. I'm not doing that. That little kid was a little shit. I'm not fucking with him.
Yeah, 20-year-olds are assholes.
Right. So just it pulls away from that, and it becomes the narrative. And there's a lot of good in this first movie. It was a great calling card for Sam. Not necessarily a great calling card for Bruce.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a
But he
I
gets
don't think it is
redemption,
a
right?
yes, 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 definitely. I don't think it's a it is not the actor's movie. It is definitely a display for the director, the producers, the effects team,
Yeah.
which at the time in horror is all you needed. It wasn't about the performances. And it's not to say that's not to say that there aren't good performances in horror movies in that era. Of course there are. But that's not what put butts in seats. You came to see the effects. You came to see the blood, the gore, the monster. And for the directors, they figured, all right, well, this is my ticket to the next level. If I show what I'm able to do behind this camera, if I'm show that I can command this set, command these actors to make something competent, then I'm pretty much on my way. And I think Sam does that. Obviously, Sam
Yeah.
did that really
I think
well. And
that speaks to, so like the two like peer reviewed whatever things that we read were Who's Laughing Now, the postmodern splatter film by Michael Arnzen, and then Postmodernism with Sam Raimi, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying About Theory and Love Evil Dead by Jeffrey Weinstock. And I
Mhm.
think the big thing that I took away from those articles is how horror, in the way that almost no other genre is. I guess you could make an argument for like science fiction, but you could also make an argument that science fiction is just a different type of horror. So like,
Mhm.
don't come at me
Oh,
with
let's
science
not
fiction or
do that.
whatever.
Let's, because that
I'm just
becomes a whole
saying.
thing.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But horror in the way that like, and I didn't go to film school, so everybody got off my dick. In
He
a way
also
that
was dick.
no other genre really does, is in constant conversation with itself and is in
Mhm.
constant conversation with the audience. Like it is,
Mhm.
if you watch these movies, and these are movies like especially Evil Dead 1, early 80s, the Evil Dead 2, late 80s, Army of Darkness, early
Early
90s, like
'90s. Yep.
there is the amount of self being the horror as a genre, referential things that happen in these movies, like it's almost impossible to like name them all, right? Like here this shot is an homage to Psycho. This is an homage to Halloween. This is an homage to Terry Gilliam's Brazil. This is an homage to
Mhm.
like there, and it's interesting because if you think about Sam Raimi as like a 20-year-old, right? And like doing research about him, whatever, knowing that him and this collective of people like Bruce and whatever were
And the
these.
Coen brothers. Yeah.
Right. Like they
Mhm.
got together on weekends and made movies, right? So they are little nerds who love movies, so they've seen all of these movies, right? And so when they're putting together a horror movie, they're like, okay, we want to do a horror movie because it is something that we think could break us into the industry, and because horror movies make money. Here are things that we know we like in horror. Here are how we can change it. Like it is this constant conversation, and especially like a splatter film, right? Like in the Arnzen article, he said splatter films are an audience-centered participation in the spiritual transcendence. Like I love that idea. Like splatter films specifically, not slashers or whatever, like splatter films, you literally go for the gore, right? Gore
Yep.
for
Pretty
gore's
much.
sake is inaccurate. Splatter films are gore for stability's sake. Like
Yep.
that sentence, when I read it, I was like, oh yeah, that's a perfect sentence. You go because you're like, I want to see a gory shit show. Like that
That's it.
that's the through line. Everything else is this like metatextual nature of like these homages, these characters, like Ash itself in Evil Dead 2 is an homage to like Rambo and stuff. It is in the way that like Scream is a specific, intentional meta narration, postmodern narration of horror as a genre. Evil Dead is almost like, especially Evil Dead 1, but the franchise is like an accidental like meta narration. Like it gets more purposeful, but like it's just interesting. I feel like it's impossible to make a horror film without having it be metatextual in some way, because it's like
It.
I'm making the zombie movie, but here this kind of looks like a Romero thing, but this is also kind of a different thing, but here's also my take on zombies. So
Mhm.
it's like a layer cake, right? Like here's all of the horror stuff that we know and love as audience members, and as creators, directors, Sam Raimi, I also love this. So it's like fan created stuff all the time too, right? Like I love horror, I'm making a horror thing. So here's the
Mhm.
layer cake of all of the like, we love Dutch angle, we love blood on the camera, we love like a disintegrating body, whatever. But here's the way that I'm gonna do it. So like that, the idea of like gore stability, like here's the thing we've come to expect as like an audience, and here's how me as a new director or new whatever is gonna do something different with it. And I think that constant conversation is part of the reason why horror as a genre is so ubiquitous. Maybe that's not the word I want. Incestuous
There
in
you
like a
go.
positive
That's
way.
the right word. That's
Yeah.
definitely the right word.
But like
Yes.
good incest.
I don't believe there are many horror films post 1978 or 79 that are not postmodern in a way. And it's
Right.
because of what you said, that there's they're all made by people who grew up on horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a bunch of people in the 70s who were making movies, not to say there weren't horror movies in the 60s, obviously there were, but they grew up on a different type of horror movie. They
Right.
grew up on Vincent Price. And again, not to say Vincent Price is, bad, but they grew up on movies like that.
Bucks.
Right. They grew up on movies like House on Haunted Hill, which I love, or The Haunting, which I also love. Whereas, Sam probably grew up on, Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Night of Living Dead to a degree and Zombie. And, he saw these movies. I mean, Dawn of the Dead. He grew up on those type of flicks, Halloween. And everyone in Sam's age bracket at that time grew up on the same stuff. And they're just, like you said, they're regurgitating back what they saw while also adding their own flavor. Sam's also a Three Stooges fan. So Evil Dead 2 has a lot of slapstick, which is Three Stooges inspired. Like, it's just, as a fellow Three Stooges fan, like, it's
What does
easy
it
for
say?
me
Like
to see
Elvis and Shemp? Like that was like the idea of like, yeah.
Yeah. Shemp is Shemp is his favorite Stooge. Same with Bruce Campbell. Like, that's their guy.
Yeah, they're like,
So,
okay, Ash will now be this bravado character that's like part Elvis and part Rambo and part Shemp.
yeah, and it makes total sense when you look at it that they are putting their personal spin on these tropes that existed 10 years before they made this movie. Especially by the time they got to 1988. I mean, by 1988, horror is the genre. I mean, good Lord. Like, in 8 years the time between Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, horror is in a completely different place.
Oh, I mean, most of the stuff that we've covered, we've only done like 6 episodes of Spooky 30s, but most of the stuff that we've covered and stuff that we have lined up to cover, most of it is from the 80s. Because when people want to talk about horror, they're like, I want to talk about something that was made in the 80s.
Right. It's just, it was, like you said, it was the era. And it's why there's a documentary that I love about it. So there was a lot for them to build on. There was a lot of ground for them to cover. I mean, even the idea of making a horror comedy in 88 is not foreign, but it's still kind of like, all right, you gotta hit that perfectly, right?
But
There
think
wasn't a
about
lot
like,
of them.
yeah, but think about also like what, okay, so 1988, later in the 80s, we have this huge horror boom in the 70s and 80s in movies
Mhm.
and also in novels. Because like, if you're a horror fan, you're going to be like, I want to get Fangoria and I want to read the books and I
Mhm.
want to like, so you're
Mhm.
consuming all of this stuff. So then you become this like really informed specific fan where you
Uh-huh.
start to read stuff and you're like, I like this trope and like I'm going to go into this movie. So you don't go into the movie being like, they're going to show me the thing that I've seen before. You go into the movie being like, yeah, they're going to show me the thing that I've seen before. I like that. I like this thing. It's like why people read fanfics. Like, yeah, I've read, an enemies to lovers fic in a bakery before. I like it. I want to read another one. Like, that's the whole point. Like, I want different flavors of cake, but I still want cake. Like, I'm going
And
to a horror movie because I like a slasher, I like a splatter. And then when things are surprising, it's like, oh, great. So you're in this constant conversation with the audiences of like, you're both a viewer that's like being wholly absorbed into a movie, especially if it's something new, like a paranormal act. That's a perfect example. Your
Mhm.
paranormal activity, right? You're like, like I like horror. I'm going to go into this. This will be fun, but I'm not looking to be like, I'm not expecting anything new to happen. I've seen so many horror
Right.
films, right? And then you're
Right.
watching it and you're like, okay, this is hitting these tropes. Cool. I like this. And then at some point, because there's something new, your brain is like, now I'm in a different world. And so, I mean, that is like postmodern stuff, right? Like you both exist. That's like Foucault, right? You exist on the outside, on the inside, right? Like you are
Mhm. Mhm.
outside of something, but in order to be outside of something, you also sort of have to be inside of something. And like that is the constant conversation. And then so with you have these 2 decades of this burgeoning fandom, these really read in terms of like the way that you say read in like an academic circle, like, you read a movie, whatever. So these well-read fans go in expecting certain things, and you are one of those well-read fans. So then you're like, well, we're going to make a comedy. It's still going to be really horrific. There's still going to be
Mhm.
crazy, awful scenes,
A
awful in
lot of
like a good
blood.
way,
Yeah, a
a
lot of blood.
ridiculous
Good
amount of
Lord.
blood. Like it's still going to have scary moments. We're still going to do all the things that constitute a horror movie. But on top of that, we're going to make fun of those things. and we're gonna make fun of it in a way that's loving. Like, these are like love letters to like the horror genre in the same way that Scream is but in a different way. Like, so you're both inviting the audience member to come in and participate, but you're also turning things on its head and being like, oh, well, if you chop off a hand, it would stop moving, but this one is alive. So now we're going to make a joke about it. Or like, oh, look, blood is coming out of the wall, just like it did in the first one. But now a lot of blood is coming out of the wall. And that's
Yeah.
fucking silly.
And that's the other thing is because you're doing a sequel, you can start to reference yourself.
Right.
Which,
and then that's extra metatextual,
exactly.
Right? That's why.
I mean, Evil Dead 2 is nothing but a reference of the first movie combined with the Three Stooges, combined with Monty Python, combined with Rambo, combined with the horror tropes of the era. Like, it's all that, but it's so specifically going left when the first movie went right. It's just like, well, what did we do here? Oh, well, let's just do more of that.
Well, and also like different. The like in-universe like retcon rewrite is like you're not treating your audience as stupid. You're just like, well, we all know this is a movie. We just wanted to condense the story and tell a new story. So like we'll do a little kind of recap, whatever. We'll hit the major beats and then we'll just continue the story. Like that's really fucking genius, but also like such a wild swing to be like,
and that's why I was talking about earlier with the ambition. Like the ambition of these two guys, specifically Sam, to just be like, yeah, you know what? Let's do that. That's fine.
And then the third one, we'll just go back in time. Sure, whatever.
Yeah, like it is.
And also retcon things from the second movie. Like each movie and series, technically, quote unquote, it is a linear timeline. Well, not linear. Obviously, there's time travel, but you know what I mean. From Ash's point of view. It's technically a linear timeline, except for in each iteration, something changes. So it's like that pulls you out of it, but pulls you out of it in a way that is fun because you're like, me as a horror / Evil Dead fan, I know what's different. It doesn't ruin the story. It almost like enhances it, and also adds to like the supernatural element, the otherworldly element, which is also like, that is the argument to be made, and it has been made, that like supernatural stuff in and of itself is like this postmodern ideal of like, well, that's how we deal with other stories. That's outside of our world, but it's being affected by our world, right? So it's fucking low key / not low key, really fucking genius.
And the thinking about the supernatural elements and how it changes things. Real quick, just a quick tangent, reminds me of Blair Witch, the latest Blair Witch movie, where they added a supernatural element to the woods themselves, and which is how people got lost, which is why they got lost, because the woods change. So it's not just like, oh, you're lost because we lost the map. Oh, okay. No, it's the woods are changing around you. So you
walked into a different world.
Yeah, right, exactly. You've actually walked into a different plane of existence now. You're not where you thought you were. And I think Evil Dead does that really well, while also, in my mind, always adding to the idea that Ash being sort of an unreliable narrative. Unreliable narrator.
100%.
Because Ash is, this is through Ash's perspective. And Ash is not.
And Ash is our quote hero, so he's our audience proxy.
Exactly.
But also he's lying to us.
Because he's lying to himself. Because he is, I'm Ash Williams. Come on. So of course, in his mind, this thing happened this way, even if we're like, did it though, Ash? I don't remember it that way. No, of course it happened that way. That's exactly the way it happened. Come on. What are you, an idiot? All right, fine. I guess he's right. It did happen that way. And it's perfectly in character, and because Sam and Bruce created such a great foundation with Evil Dead, it allows them to get away with those things in Evil Dead 2. And then because they created such a great foundation in Evil Dead 2, they can get away with those things in Army of Darkness. And
and it also lends itself to being turned into a musical, being turned into a video game, being turned into comic books, being turned whatever, because like you have in each new iteration, it's the same story, same character, but different. It's almost like an unintentional fucking Ash is an unreliable narrator, so he can be in any situation, but is B, an unintentional like multiverse, almost like the Evil
You're
Dead
right. It's
multiverse.
right, with multiple Ashes all
Maybe
doing different
multiverse of
things.
madness.
Huh. Which Sam Raimi's also directing.
I
Haha.
know.
See, I see what.
Honestly, doing all of this research for this movie or for this franchise has made me more excited about Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness than any other part of that. Like, yeah, I'm excited to see America Chavez. Yeah, sure, Marvel films, whatever. But as somebody who's kind of MCU'd out, like rewatching the Spider-Man movies and revisiting Sam Raimi's take on comic books. I mean, that scene in Spider-Man 2 is in the hospital when Octavius
Mm-hmm.
wakes up. That's a
Mm-hmm.
horror. That's a horror scene.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yep.
that's
Straight
that's a
up.
fucking scary scene. That is a horror scene. And knowing that Sam Raimi is going to be doing this Doctor Strange movie makes me more excited about this movie because I can't wait to see Sam Raimi back in a comic book universe, but also like Kevin Feige has said, like, I want a Sam Raimi movie. I want something that's comic book, but I want something that's horror. Like, this is a horrific thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited about that. And like, we know that Bruce Campbell has a cameo. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
are we
Mm-hmm.
going to see Ash? Like, that
That'd be
would be
great if we
pretty
saw
cool.
Ash. I
Ash
mean,
and has,
he's a comic book character. Yeah.
and also Ash has fought Marvel Zombies before, and
He
we know that Marvel
has.
Zombies are going to be in this movie. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Rights to things are insane, but like that would be fucking cool. I want to see Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness because I want to see Ash shoot a fucking Tony Stark zombie in the head with his boomstick. Like I don't care about anything else.
I would love to see that. The one, so on our other podcast, I sometimes say that Stella and I are like of the same brain, right? So it's funny because I said basically something similar to that to a couple friends of mine because they were like, "Oh, y'all want us to get tickets to see Doctor Strange for opening weekend?" I was like, I'm like, yeah, but only reason I really want to see it is because of Sam. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
really going for Doctor Strange. I'm not going for anything else. I just want to see a Sam Raimi movie. That's pretty
I'm
much
going
it.
for
So
America Chavez and Sam Raimi. That's all I'm going
for Sam,
for.
and that's no diss to America Chavez. It's just I'm going for Sam. He's like, if it's again, no diss to anyone else. Like, I love America Chavez, love Benedict Cumberbatch.
No, we're not
love Elizabeth
giving Benedict
Olsen.
Cumberbatch like credit
I
on
am
this.
for his Doctor Strange. I love his Doctor Strange. I'm
He
giving
is
him
good
props.
at Doctor Strange, I guess. Whatever.
Yes,
His Sherlock was
yes.
stupid. And he was in Wrath of Khan, so he will never get any
Okay,
credit.
look, we're definitely all right. We're definitely not going to go down that road because you and I are of the same mind. And if I start thinking about that, I'm going to immediately take back all the props I give him. But again, not his fault. He did the job. He signed up for it. Hey, man. Well, whatever.
Seems
Anyway,
like it's his fault.
I love Elizabeth Olsen. Loves what she does with Scarlet Witch. Yeah, but I'm just like, no, man. I'm there for Sam. Like, I'm there for Sam. I want to see. Especially because when they first announced this movie, they talked about it being more of a horror movie. And this is what Scott Dickerson, who, the director of Sinister, he directed the first Doctor Strange, but this guy directed Sinister. He co-wrote Sinister. All right. When he's talking about doing a horror movie, I want to see that because I like Sinister. I like Sinister a whole lot. And then
I've never seen Sinister, the movie, and all I'm thinking
Ooh.
about is like this very sassy drag queen of an X-Men character.
No, it's not. It is.
I love
not
modern
that.
day Sinister so much, and I hate that Sinister is one of my favorite characters now. Anyways, the Krakoa era of X-Men is wild. Please continue.
Sinister is definitely not that. It is a quick synopsis. It's Ethan Hawke plays a writer who is one of those true crime writers who had one big hit, and he's been trying to chase that high ever since. He moves his family into a house, which he doesn't reveal to his wife and his kids, is the house of a murder. And
Men really be messing everything up for everyone around them.
We really do. We really do. And he investigates the murder, and he goes down this trail. I'm not giving anything else away, but it goes to some sinister places. That's all I'm going to say. And so Scott Derrickson, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do a horror movie. Okay, I want to see that, dude, because I really like Sinister. Cool. And then Scott's kicked off of it. Creative differences, as there always are. And I'm just like, all right, man, whatever. And they bring in Sam. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, maybe it's still going to retain some of his horror.
But also fit the universe where MCU is like a silly universe of quips and bullshit.
Right, of course, yeah.
I say that in a positive way with love, whatever.
Yeah, well, yeah. We're on the same page. You'll be okay, listeners. It's fine. And I'm just like, all right, cool. And the last Sam Raimi movie I really like, actually, no, he did direct the Wizard of Oz movie after that, but he did Drag Me to Hell, which I thought was fantastic. I'm like, okay, Sam back on the horror train. Cool, 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 cool. And then I watched Evil Dead 2 for this, obviously, and Army of Darkness. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, let's do that. Let's do that
Yeah.
again. Let's go down that road again. Yeah. I really want to see because what's fascinating about Evil Dead 2, besides all the backstory and the you mentioned it earlier. Stephen King is one of the reasons we
Yeah.
have an Evil Dead 2. He's
Stephen King was
making
like, this is pretty good, y'all.
well, he was making I'm only laughing because I adore this movie for some reason. He's making Maximum Overdrive. And good lord, that's a film. And Dino De Laurentiis, the famous producer Dino De Laurentiis, who passed away fairly recently, who also had the rights to Your Precious Hannibal,
I just
was
like
on
the
the
TV
set.
show, for the record.
Well, he had the rights to Hannibal. He had the rights to
I
the
know.
show. Yeah, he had the rights to that. Also, Dino De Laurentiis, he's a known producer in Hollywood, famous producer. He's done a lot of movies that people love, people don't love, whatever. But he's done some classic bangers too. And he's not trying to give up money to Sam to make Evil Dead 2. He's on the set of Maximum Overdrive. Stephen King is like, what? Nah, give him the money. He deserves the money. Evil Dead is great. You should, no. I want to, and that's what got Evil Dead 2 made. Stephen King just being like, yo, no, give him the money and let him go do what he did. And it is such a wild 180 from the first one. What I do like is it doesn't even really try to give its ancillary characters any type of whatever
Character at all. I
like
can't even remember. There's
yeah
a guy in overalls.
yep
There's like a girl who swallows an eyeball.
yep
There's like the daughter of the archaeologists.
yep
They exist to exist. They're not
yep
there for any real purpose.
and
Like
they don't
other
show
than
up
to have
until
bodies that get possessed and died. Like
that's it, and they don't show up to like 30-45 minutes into the movie.
yeah.
The majority
Bruce
of it
Campbell's
is
chopped his hand off. He's had
yes
a weird relationship with furniture where they're all laughing at each other. He's had a
right
whole experience. He killed his girlfriend,
and
watched her dance around, and then these people show up and he's like, look, I'm really busy.
I mean, he's already gone mad at this point. Like the
Yeah.
scene where everybody's laughing and then he's laughing.
That's my favorite scene in that movie.
Incredible.
I love that scene so much.
He so I talked about this earlier, but we don't give props, and by we I mean the royal we, to horror films for their performances. What Bruce Campbell does in the first 45 minutes of that movie by himself is incredible.
That's what
Like
people remember from that movie.
incredible.
People don't really remember all the other shit that happens with the people
No.
that show up. People remember the
No.
hand. People remember the dancing scene. People remember the laughing with the furniture. Like, people remember the chainsaw. Like, they remember Bruce Campbell. We don't. That's why, like, honestly, no characters really exist in these movies, in this franchise, until we get a series and we can get 3 seasons of like actual character growth from Ash, but also other characters. Because in these movies, it's like, I'm sorry, we need at least 30 minutes of Bruce Campbell beating the shit out of himself.
Right. And he does it all. He does it well. Like he did his own makeup on this movie. He did his own stunts on this movie. He did everything. And a Sam Raimi movie is not a movie where the actor just comes and just acts. You're a part of the crew.
Yeah.
So he was, again, like I said this about Carpenter earlier, he was a one-man band. There was nothing he couldn't do in this film. And you talked about character. The Deadites had more character in this movie than they do in the first one. They have more character than most of the actual characters in this movie.
That's one thing that's really interesting. If you think about the first movie throughout everything, the Deadites are really fucking consistent, even from the first one. Like Ash from 1 and 2, very different characters. The Deadites are consistent in the whole thing in a positive way. They're petty assholes that love to fuck with people and are really gross. They're great. They're the camera shot's consistent. Like when you see that camera shot, shit's about to get fucked up. The music, the way that they're like growling and the sound effects of the Deadites consistent throughout the whole thing. Like that is pretty incredible.
Let me ask you this question. Because Evil Dead 2 starts with this quasi remake of Evil Dead 1 and then becomes its own thing, how do you think that would work? Not work. How do you think audiences today would feel about that? if we got a sequel to a movie that, came out a couple years ago, and it does that in 2022.
I don't know. There would probably be some like fucking weird message boards, blah, blah, blah. But I
And
think the big deal is that 2 is significantly better than 1 in many ways. So the fact that it is better, because if it had done this and then was a worse movie, like we wouldn't be having this conversation. You know what I mean? So like, because so there's this book called Notes on Camp by Susan Sontag. I actually used it a bunch for my thesis, but it's about like camp as a genre. So she talks a lot about like drag performers and John Waters, obviously king of like camp, right?
Obviously, Baltimore, give it up.
Right. So there's this idea of like when something's camp, it goes into quotations, right? Like this is a quote horror film. This is a quote masculine man. This is a quote woman. This is a quote man. Like you're putting it in quotes because you are putting artifice and exaggeration onto it, right? But the thing that I learned, I must have like not remembered this or whatever, but from that article, the like postmodernism with Sam Raimi, or how I learned to stop worrying about theory and love Evil Dead, which like you don't have to read these articles to like really get into this podcast or whatever. But if I were to recommend one, this article fucking is super good. It's about this guy who's a teacher being like, here's how you teach postmodernism to students by instead of using like Foucault or like Cyborg Manifesto, which I love, but like it's very dense and hard to read. Why don't you teach postmodernism through the Evil Dead movies? Here's how it breaks down perfectly. It's super good. But
it's funny. That was actually I kind of did. My thesis was teaching political messaging through movies rather than using books that no one really wants to read anymore.
Yeah, right. It'd be way more fun to like watch Evil Dead and be like, here's the meta narration of like the director, like here, like it's a docu horror almost, because all of these actors were being like tortured basically, and now you can see them on screen. Or here's the like Ash as a performance of masculinity, or Ash as a cyborg when he turns his like hand into a chainsaw, or like there's intertextual spaces, heterotopias. Like it actually breaks down really well. It's pretty incredible. Like if I ever went back to like, if I ever wanted to be a teacher, I'd be like, hey, we're going to talk about Evil Dead all the time. But
You'd be the best professor ever.
he talks about, he references Susan Sontag's book, it's called Under Erasure. So instead of like the quotes, you put like a strike through of the word, right? So you put a strike through of horror, but you can still see the word, right? And I think, and so the word is still affecting what you're reading. Like it's technically been removed. It's under erasure, but we all can see the word. So it's still affecting how we're thinking about it. And I think that Evil Dead 2 is like the perfect encapsulation of the idea of like quote horror, or the like strike through horror. Like this is not a horror film because it's funny and it has all this other stuff, but it's in constant conversation with horror in a way that is like very unique to itself, and it's in constant conversation. So you could put a strike through of like Evil Dead, like this is a quote Evil Dead movie, this is a strike through Evil Dead movie, because it's in conversation with that first one, but it's also a new thing. So like it's not really that, or even like the idea of like, we go back to Ash and his like body and stuff, like by the end of it he's quote Ash. Like what is Ash? Ash has been completely decentered. What is Linda? Linda was a different person in the first one and the second one. Linda is a quote of a person. Like that is so cool. Anyways, Notes on Camp is quite a good book.
So here's the one thing I don't like, even though I agree with a lot of that, but the one thing that always rubs me the wrong way when is trying to define horror, right? And this gets to probably the Aquarius in me, who just hates definitions and hates being locked into things, and always has to find something to rebel against. But it's the introduction of elevated horror. Like I fucking hate that term so much.
Yeah, it's stupid.
Yeah, and I don't like when people try to box horror in. I watched Evil Dead 2 this most recent time with someone who's never seen it. A friend of mine, and I was, explaining, he was just like, so
what the fuck is going on?
Right. He's like, so what's going on? And like, he was like, am I supposed to be afraid of this or laughing? And I think it's because we again, as society, have this very rigid definition of horror that it's harder for things like Evil Dead 2 to find their place amongst like a mainstream audience. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, because they can't really say, oh, it's horror or oh, it's comedy. No, it's in
It's
between.
both. It's
It's both of those
everything.
things.
It's
Right.
it
It's
is it
exactly
is a drag performance of horror in like a positive way, right? Like
right.
it is absolutely horror. This is a performance of a womanhood or in terms of like Ash. Like this is a performance of masculinity. It is that, but it's also another thing. It's
Right.
both.
And that's
Binaries don't
okay.
really exist. This is a
Yeah.
thing.
And it's almost like Gremlins was a horror comedy, but Gremlins always had Gizmo. Yeah, I mean, so Gizmo was like the
Gremlins has some fucked up
oh, it
scenes.
does.
That
It
movie is
incredibly
fucked
does.
up. It's also
That movie,
hilarious. That speech where she's like, "My mom died
yeah, with the Santa Claus, yeah,
Christmas Day." That shit makes
and
me laugh every time.
it's insane. But it, well, like I said, it has Gizmo, and Gizmo is like the Trojan horse. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, okay, cool. Gizmo's the thing
Gizmo's
that
a
you can
little
sell to
boring
people,
bitch.
but he's the thing that you can sell to people, and
Yeah,
that's why people they don't question what
you
Gremlins
can
is. They're
sell
just like, oh,
Pinhead. You can sell Gizmo. You can sell Freddy.
you
How do
can't.
you
It's
sell
hard
Ash?
to. Yeah, it's hard. You can't sell it. You can't sell Ash, and it's just
I mean, you can,
so.
but it's also confusing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be confused. Like you just said, which Ash are you selling?
Yeah, what Ash are you selling?
What is Ash? Is Ash commodity? Is Ash a commodity? I don't know.
Is Ash the hero or is Ash the bad guy? Because Ash has, like, if you were just looking at it, like, because Ash has a chainsaw in his hand. That seems like something a
And
bad guy would have.
and he got a shotgun.
But he's a good guy.
Yeah.
If you're
And
just looking
and
at a poster, I mean, like objectively.
yeah, I agree. And he's all got his blood on his face. Like, well, what did he do? What did he just butcher and massacre? And it chafes me so much that it's like I hate when people ask me, oh, have you seen such and such? Yeah, so is it scary? Don't ask me that. Like, I don't
Yeah, I
like
can't
that.
tell you that.
Right, and I have
I
and
can tell you if
I
it
get
scared me.
exactly. That's what I always say. I was like, look, it scared me, or no, it didn't scare me, but I don't know if it's going to scare you. And it's just we are, and that goes back to the binary thing, like you said, we are such a binary society where something either is or it isn't. There's no room for the nuance of, well, it can be both a horror and a comedy, or well, horror is subjective, therefore I can't tell you whether this thing is scary. You know, something that my best friend terrified of home invasion movies, terrified. That's his biggest fear, that someone's going to break into his home, where his wife is and his child is, and you know abscond, steal shit, whatever. Like they're going to invade his privacy. Whereas my biggest fear is something like Halloween, where it's just this very mundane thing where it's just like, yo, you're not even Halloween, like The Strangers, where this bad thing happened to you, not because you did anything, not because you asked for it. You were
Wrong
just
place, wrong
home.
time.
Right. You just happened to be there at this time of day.
And
And
my
you got
biggest fear
fucked.
is when two bodies exist in the same time and they splice into each other.
Ooh, so The Fly. Okay.
Yeah, it's fucking well, but The Fly is different. People would know this if they listen to this podcast or extracts. It's when it's like the dimensional thing, like when two dimensions come up into each other. So like two bodies are literally like if I was Shadowcat and my power stopped working while I was walking
Oh,
through somebody.
so like Altered States, which is
Yeah,
an '80s movie.
well, I will never
we'll
watch
talk.
it.
Okay, yeah, you
That's
should
like
watch Altered
it
States.
squicks me. Even that like the X-Files episode Dreamland where the like
Mm.
things are like that squicked me hard. That was really hard for me to watch. Most of that episode of Extracts is me going like, so I didn't know that this is my biggest fear, but it is.
Yeah, you shouldn't watch Altered States then. Not even just don't watch it. Don't even watch clips of it. So home invasion movies don't bug me, but like wrong place, wrong time, someone with a knife, someone with a machete, whatever, freaks me out. And
Yeah, you have your
evil,
lines. You find what
yeah,
things you like. That's horror is such a giant genre. Like if
yeah.
you wanted to come on this podcast and talk about Saw, I would be like, we're not doing that. I don't want to watch that. That's not.
I remember
That's
you
not.
said that. You're like, that's not. You're like, I
That's on a
can't do
list of
that.
no's. I don't want to
Yep.
do that. I'm not here for torture porn. I'm here for weird like. What is my body in space and like who am I and like whatever and
And
existential. I like existential horror.
yeah, and that's what a lot of Evil Dead 2 is. It is, beyond the slapstick, beyond the ridiculousness, beyond the bravado. I mean, it's just even like I said, Bruce Campbell said, "Well, look, we wanted to do a horror movie." He said, "There's a lot of people running around with chainsaws and knives, but not many people are possessed, so let's do that. They want
And
to do
not many
something
people have
that they
chainsaws as a hand.
also that like they want to do something that they feel like couldn't happen. And yeah, you can't chop your hand off and have it then fight you.
Also, every time I see that, I'm like, how did he not just get the worst infection?
A friend, anher friend of mine said that, so she was like, "Oh my god, it's gonna like how? Oh, he's gonna
He's
have to
gonna
like
die
cut
from
that thing off."
gangrene.
Yeah, yeah, and and it's crazy. Like Evil Dead 2 exists in my head as those moments rather than an actual cohesive
Yeah.
movie.
I feel like Evil
uh,
Dead kind of as a franchise is like that. Evil Dead is made up of like moments, which is part of the reason it lends itself to so much reinterpretation.
mhm. And I think Army of Darkness is the most story focused movie in the franchise. It
Yeah.
is okay. We are here in Swords and Sandal time. Ash has got to try to figure out how to get out. So it is a really plot driven movie
Yeah.
about point A, point B, point C, point D. Okay, now the movie can end. Whereas Evil Dead, both of them, they're more like fever dreams. It's like, all right, I kind of remember this thing happening. I definitely remember that happening. And who was that person? But I remember they got killed. It's almost like you're a kid telling a story at the playground. And just like, yeah, and then this guy, like, had to kill his girlfriend with a chainsaw, and then he put his chainsaw in his hand, and then he had to saw off a shotgun, and he put a shotgun in his back, and then
And then
someone
he
got
has said
killed.
some puns, and I mean, those movies are iconic scenes and puns. Those are
Yeah,
the movies.
yeah. I mean, it's basically every Arnold Schwarzenegger movie from the '80s. Yeah.
Which is also in and of itself like a reference to other things. Be like, we're making stuff from the
Ah,
80s. We are gonna
exactly.
make puns.
You gotta,
It's
and I mean,
great.
because that's what action heroes did. Then they
Yeah.
had the one-liners. Arnold had one-liners. Not so much
Fucking
Rambo,
Buffy
but
has one-liners. Like
Buffy has one. Yeah,
that is
that
the
was the thing.
quintessential like horror comedy thing. Like if you are making a horror comedy, you gotta have one-liners. Reanimator is full of fucking
Oh
one-liners.
God.
Like
Oh my God. They're gonna believe you ahead. Get a job in a side. Get a like,
so
get a
good.
job in a sideshow. Oh, I love it so much. I love those movies. Barbara Crampton. Shout out to
That
Barbara
you know what?
Crampton.
I think we figured it out. How you can tell if something is a horror movie or a horror comedy is how many puns are in it. That is how
That's a good.
you that's how
That's a
you
good
tell
one.
it's a horror comedy.
Not a lot of
Okay.
puns in Gremlins, but yeah.
Well, I mean, do you speak Gremlin? They might be
That's a good point.
making
I don't
puns
speak
the whole
Mogwai.
time.
You're right. I don't speak Mogwai. You're right. Good point. Fair
The
enough.
gremlin in the
Touche.
lipstick is definitely making puns. I'm telling
Oh,
you.
yo, in Gremlins
That
2.
gremlin
Oh my
has read
God.
Susan Sontag's Notes on Camp and is all about it.
And in Gremlins 2, where they have the female gremlin.
Gremlins take
The
Manhattan.
Yeah, the funniest shit to me is where she she develops a crush on one of the workers at the place.
Yeah.
And she's coming after him and he's clearly not interested, and she starts yelling, "Why won't you commit?"
Come on, Gremlin.
Every
So
time.
good.
Every time I see it, it's funny.
Okay, so we generally close this out with do you have any other thoughts before I move on to some Discord listener stuff?
So Army of Darkness, we touched on Army of Darkness, we didn't really hit it like
Yeah.
that. Like Army of Darkness is such a weird entry in this entire franchise because it's, we talked about the setting, but it's not like there's the
It both
least amount of
fits
horror.
right. It both fits in the franchise, but also is its separate thing. It is like it
Yeah,
feels
there's
it
more money.
is yeah.
It's more money. It is a universal movie, and I don't mean universal in the sense of like everyone can see it,
No,
but it
it's
is
literally
produced
made by a
by
different company.
yeah, it is made by a big time studio. It's got big time money behind it. They felt like Bruce Campbell was going to be a star, and Sam Raimi was going to be the
Well,
next
that's the
guy. And
beginning of the 90s. We talked about that in
Yeah,
X-Rex too. Like Bruce Campbell's TV show and stuff was supposed to be like the
oh,
vehicle for Fox, and then
yeah,
X-Files was like, "LOL, fuck you."
yeah. I love Briscoe County Jr. Love it. Shocking, surprisingly, I love Briscoe County Jr.
Also thinking of
And
fucking Scream, like David Arquette was supposed to be a big star. He wasn't. Bruce Campbell was supposed to be
yeah,
a big star. He wasn't
there's a
comparatively.
lot of that in horror of, okay, this person's going to be great and we're going to put this money behind him, and it just doesn't work out for whatever the reasons are. And Army of Darkness is the most technically proficient of these movies because again, there's a budget, there's an actual special, there's a big time special effects team, K&B. There is, there's a gorgeous leading lady, and that's not to say the leading ladies.
Do you mean the teacher from Matilda?
Oh yes, she is. Yes,
the whole time I was like,
that is her.
Who is this? Who is this?
Oh my god!
Oh, it's the teacher from Matilda.
And the one-liners, I love the one-liners in Army of Darkness. Like there's the one where he's like, "Hey pal, you're in charge of Jack and shit," and Jack just left country. Jack just left town. Like I love it.
Hail to the king, baby.
Hail to the king, baby. Oh man, it is. I mean, and we talked about Evil Dead, Army of Darkness, referencing action movies.
Evil Dead, Army of Darkness is 100 films in one movie.
Right, but to that point, they then became the reference. I know you don't like you don't play video games like that.
Yeah.
Duke Nukem is Ash. Duke Nukem has "Hail to the King, baby." Like Duke Nukem does all of Ash's quips in the video game, and it's just like, yo, this is this weird thing where the feedback loop stretched out to video games, and now there's going to be an Evil Dead video game, but
another Evil Dead video game. There's a bunch of Evil Dead video games that already exist, but there's like a new one coming out.
Right. And I just think Army of Darkness was the one that it was the one that tried to mainstream it, but it mainstreamed it just enough where people could see that and say, oh, well, hold up. What's this other two movies? Yeah. And it be like Army of Darkness is the gateway for me. It wasn't the gateway for me, but I've noticed that with people that I know, they see that movie first and it makes it
it's a pretty
easier.
Iconic poster too. Like I feel like people have like, oh, I've seen that poster.
Army of Darkness is just it is a miracle of a movie. Like I said, the fact that it exists, to me is an achievement on its own.
Yeah, people that I've noticed, like talking about Evil Dead or even like reading stuff, like people rightfully put it in its own kind of category a lot, but also people, I feel like, denigrate on it a little bit. And I don't think that it deserves it.
No.
Each Evil Dead series, movie, whatever iteration can stand completely on its own. That's also really interesting. Like Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, the series, the musical. I haven't read the comic books, but I'm pretty sure probably the comic books. Like it's pretty incredible that each of them can kind of stand on their own.
He does fight hell. He does do Pinhead.
But Pinhead's not a bad guy, so.
I know, but there is an Ash.
Pinhead has a job. He clocks in, he does his job, and he clocks out. Doug Bradley has incredible, this is my 9 to 5 energy, okay? And like, I just want to...
you need to watch that special I'm talking about because Doug Bradley's on there talking about all the different things. Yeah.
I buy into the cult of Clive Barker really hard, so...
podcast.
Death of the author, except for Brian Fuller, is like my personal motto. But like, I could probably put an asterisk there for Clive Barker.
We've always talked about this. I would put one there for John Carpenter.
That's fair. That's fair.
I need his name above The Fold. Sorry, I just need to see that.
That's fair.
John Carpenter's blank. Cool. I'm good.
Yeah, but I think Army of Darkness is very good. It's just it has so much going on that it's like. It is definitely a horror film. There's horrific things that happen, but it does feel more like a fantasy film. And like the way that we like joked and we're like, we're not going to talk about it, where it's like, well, you could make an argument that a lot of sci-fi is also horror. You could make an argument that a lot of like fantasy and like sword and sorcery stuff is also horror. And like, I feel like Army of Darkness leans whereas Evil Dead 2 really walks the line of comedy and horror. Like it's kind of 50-50. Army of Darkness feels way more fantasy. Yep. Like it should be shelved in the fantasy section instead of the horror section. Like you would look at it for a moment and be like, but then you would ultimately put it in the fantasy section.
Agreed. That's it for me. That's all I wanted to say. Shout out to Army of Darkness. Wanted to give it its love and its props.
That's fair. So the big thing that we talked about in the Discord was how it was like most people's interaction with it was like, yeah, I watched a movie and stuff, but I loved going to the musical. I loved reading the comic books and stuff like that. That to me, again, I've said it a million times. This is a repetitive podcast. It's 2 hours long. Just get over it. Like the intertextual nature of it is really fascinating, but also the way that it can like stand so completely on its own really helps reach so many different audiences and helps to like keep that like cult status alive, right? I really, really like that. And then of course, so we end Not Your Demographic a lot with what we call a peg, marry, kill, and now we do it on this fucking podcast too. So we have a peg, marry, kill from our good bestie Jolene. She gave us 2, but because me and you both couldn't really even remember most of the dudes' names, we're gonna be skipping over the dudes. Because I don't even remember who Arthur is, to be honest. But we'll skip to
I
the
want to say that's the guy in the overalls.
No, is it? Okay, Scotty. We figured out Scotty. And then there was Jake, who, because one of them's going to be the shitty, or the boyfriend of the girl who's the daughter.
Right.
And then Arthur. But what
Okay,
about,
all right, yep.
wasn't the guy in the overalls like Bob or something? They had like a hillbilly name. Honestly, a peg, marry, kill is fucking impossible with this because none of the characters actually like
Are real people.
are real people. Honestly, the answer is just peg, marry, kill Ash.
I mean, he's the only one. I mean, maybe
You definitely
maybe
want to
Linda.
peg him because you need to like be like, here, let's explore your masculinity. Like, you don't have to perform all the time, like whatever. You do want to marry him because he is actually like under the surface a pretty sweet dude, sweet guy. But then you also want to kill him because you're like, if I hang around you too much, I am gonna die. That's actually the answer.
It's Jake. That's the overalls guy, Jake.
His name's Jake?
Yeah.
Well, now, oh, the girl's name is Bobby Joe. I was like, I know there is some dumb hillbilly name. The girl who eats the eyeball. Because eyeballs are not safe in horror.
Jake. Ed is the other guy. Ed Getley, I think. Either way,
man.
Jake. Yeah.
So Scotty's from the first one, shitty best friend.
Yep.
Jake is played by Dan Hicks. Overalls. Yep. And then well, then who is Arthur? Is Arthur from Army of Darkness? Oh, he's King Arthur.
Yeah, I was like, yes, he's the king. I'm like, that sounds right. It sounds like he should be there. Yes.
You know what? I would feel bad about us forgetting about all of this, but we literally talked about how the characters other than Ash are forgettable. So I feel actually pretty okay that this point, peg, marry, kill has that like.
I mean, yeah, Ash. Look, Ash is the only one who matters here. Like that's ultimately what this entire series is about.
But I guess technically I would marry King Arthur, even though his haircut is terrible. But he was actually pretty chill. And he was
I'm probably marrying Arthur. I mean,
he was a pretty decent king. Yeah, the castle.
Yeah, and Arthur's
a man of his word in the movie.
Unlike Ash.
Yeah.
And if I'm killing anybody, I'm if we're picking just random people to kill, I'm killing Jake because I know his name.
Yeah, I'm gonna kill Jake too because he looked like he smelled not very good.
Yeah, and a friend of mine was very upset that he was wearing his dog tags because she's a military, she's a vet, and she's like, "Why is he just wearing his dog tags in public?"
Because he was like a gross like dude that wanted to be like, I was in the military. It's a performative masculinity thing. That's what it is. Yeah. And honestly, Bobby Joe, she is way too pretty to be that dude. He was really
punching down. Yeah, I was looking she was punching down. Yep.
Maybe Ed or Jake was really sweet. And then Scott was like an asshole in the first one, but like, you know, I feel like he could get behind a pegging. I feel like it would. He was an asshole in the way that like a shitty college student was, right? Like he's still figuring things out. He's performing like a lot of stuff. Like he does kind of like learn a little bit by the end before he dies. He does definitely die. He's experimenting. I think he's the right choice to peg.
I'm happy with all these decisions. Okay. I concur. I'm happy with all these decisions.
So before.
Do I say anything special to these people?
Yeah, of course. So before I throw to the Nightmare Corner with producer Bobby, we're going to say goodbye to Marcus. Marcus, tell the people where they can read all of your great horror critiques and also where to follow you on Twitter.
So follow me on Twitter at Abstract Poetic, a 3 with a E normally is. I normally do a rhyme, but I'm not in a rhyming mode. But you understand. Yeah, you're not a spell poetic. Just put a 3 where that E is supposed to be. And I did the rhyme anyway.
You did the rhyme anyways.
I did the rhyme anyway. You can read about all my horror stuff at bloodydisgusting.com. Bloody Disgusting is a great horror website. And I'm not just saying that because, I write for them from time to time. But it's just a really comprehensive site. Opinions ranging from everything to anything you wouldn't think about when it comes to horror. It's covered there. But yeah, that's where my horror stuff is. I'm supposed to be writing something that, for next month that was supposed to be this month, but, life gets in the way. So I
WrestleMania got
definitely
in our
got
way. That's why this
wrestle.
podcast is late.
That's,
WrestleMania got in our
yeah.
way.
Vince McMahon got in my way. And with Vince McMahon only being somewhat in my way now, I'm going to actually get to that. So that's where that will be. So yeah, that's it for me.
Well, thanks for coming on, Marcus. I hope you had a good time and you
This was
got
great,
to
man. Thank you for
read all
inviting
of
me.
the crazy articles. I was like, Marcus, are you overwhelmed by my notes?
Nah, not at all. Again, I told her the notes help because all they did was buttress, big word, all the stuff that I heard from years of being inundated with this movie, from commentaries to talking head interviews to random articles in Fangoria. Yeah, this was great.
Also, Marcus will get me the name of those documentaries that he referenced, and I will put them in the notes that I post on the Discord and in the episode show, because we talked about them a lot. So we should definitely send people where they could see them because they sound really good.
Yes, everyone gets Shudder. That's the bottom line. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Shudder's pretty good.
Yeah,
Sponsor my podcast, Shudder.
Yeah, seriously, sponsor the podcast, Shudder.
All right. Thank you, Marcus.
Thanks, man.
Well, hello, Mr. Fancy Pants.
You didn't have an Evil Dead nightmare. The Evil Dead nightmare was getting this podcast done and out.
Yeah. All right. How do we start this? I forgot.
That's it. That's how I started it. I just started it right there.
Oh, okay. Look, between WrestleMania and the Plan 9 show, and then now I have COVID, this podcast has been my Evil Dead. I feel like an Evil Dead zombie, except for I'm not fighting a pretty handsome dude with a big chin, just fighting my chest and phlegm.
Yeah, and you tend not to be, as you so put it during the show, so like neggy and bitchy as the Deadites are.
Yeah. They're so funny. I love how bitchy they are. Maybe I would not have had a problem with zombies in the past if they were just like drag queens.
If they were just quippy.
Yeah. That's a thing that I'm not looking forward to, like more modern horror, is that like I really like the quippiness of the like 80s and early 90s horror that I've been watching. Something tells me that Midsommar is not a quip fest.
Midsommar is not a quip fest. I'll just throw that out there. And there's no real figures to be drawn to, like the Deadites or the Cenobites or Ghostface or
my boy Herbert West.
Your boy Herbert West, yeah.
No blankets in Midsommar.
Actually, there are a lot of blankets in Midsommar.
Are they bear-shaped? I read the Wikipedia page.
Yeah, it is really funny you said that, because we mentioned Midsommar and bears, and anybody listening to this right now is like freaking out, really excited for you to watch that and put that together now. So that'll be fun.
All right. I don't have a nightmare corner. This was not it's funny because there was times when I was watching the TV show where I was like, ooh, some of the graphics are pretty gross, but it did not trigger any nightmares. So no nightmare corner. I'm sorry. No NXT Cenobites in the pool for this one.
That's okay. That's okay. We will love that when it's there, but it's not a necessity. We cannot delve into your mind and pull the strings of your subconscious, as it were.
My psyche does what it wants.
Oh yeah, that is true. Kind of floating right into that, because these are lighthearted, fun gore fests.
Uh-huh.
Let's talk about the Lollipop Man scale. Let's talk about the spooky scale for these, because yes, it is kind of jump scary and there are some gory elements. But how are you feeling watching all of this?
Well, obviously I didn't have any nightmares and I wasn't like plagued by it, but I for sure couldn't eat during or right after it. I'll tell you that much. And like I said, there is some stuff in the TV show specifically. The first movie, even though it's really low rent, has some scary moments. And then the TV show has some fucked up stuff and some scary moments. So even though I didn't have nightmares, with the spooky scales of 5, I would still give it, I think maybe, oh, fuck. Because it's funny, but there's gross, scary stuff, and the makeup is pretty horrific. 3.5? maybe a 4.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends. Because it's hard to be like, Ash versus the Evil Dead is so scary. But also some of the graphics are really gnarly. In that like early 90s, like late 80s Willow type of way where you're like, was I allowed to watch this as a child? That's insane.
Okay, well, that leads right into our next question then, which is specific imagery. And we could break it down by movie and series if you want. But
I would
what
say
still sticks out in your head?
I would say the first one is Linda's possession, because that actress is like not very good until she gets possessed, and then she's like really fucking good. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The like creepy baby voice, and even though the makeup was really very simple for her Deadite version, it was like the simpleness of it made it really creepy. I don't know. I think that actress did a pretty good job, and that's very memorable. And even though a lot of it like retconned or whatever in the second one, that is the most memorable part. That or the like cornmeal that comes out of somebody's arm. This is like, is this a breakfast food? And I think people are probably shocked that I'm not saying the tree scene, but like I feel like the less said about the tree scene is probably better and the best.
Y'all talked that out. That was a very, very good breakdown and discussion of that. And I agree. It just kind of doesn't need to be there, and we don't have to talk about it because of that. So yes.
We sure don't. So for Evil Dead 2, I love the scene where Ash is like losing his mind and like just laughing with the furniture. It's definitely my favorite part where they're all just, it's just like the lamp and the couch. And it's like this weird demented Pee-wee's Playhouse moment of like Ash being like, whatever, sure. Just like yucking it up with the furniture. I love that scene because it's part him like really pissed and like, I'm going to kill everyone, but part him just succumbing to the madness and like I'm not here for a long time, I'm here for a good time, let's go.
This is it, this is my life now. And it kind of sets him on that trajectory for all of the crazy shit that happens afterwards in so many different mediums. Yes.
Evil Dead 3 would be 2 moments. One, obviously him kicking his own ass, like it's very iconic. And also, like I said, his own beautiful ass. And it like I said, Evil Dead 3 to me really feels like a Monty Python movie that's a zombie movie, and like that scene specifically very much feels like that, right? And then also the moment when I realized that the love interest was the teacher from Matilda. Thank you. And then for the TV series, I hate to get away, but I think we talked about it in the podcast. The opening scene of it looking like Ash is like booting up and like gonna put on his like boomstick and he's ready for a fight, but he's really just putting on a fucking girdle to go try and smash at a local bar is incredible. It is one of my favorite scenes ever. It rules. It's so perfect. It boils him down so perfectly. And if you had never even seen the movies and you just got like, I don't know, bullied into watching the show, or you're just like, sure, I don't know what this is. That just encapsulates his character so perfectly that you're just like thrown right in and you're like, yeah, I get it. I get who this dude is.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Just strapping on the girdle, mouthing along to space truckers. Yeah. Perfect. Perfect, Ash.
Oh, very good. Yeah. So those would be my images.
Fantastic. Since recording that, have you gone back to the series at all?
Nope.
You have plenty of media on your plate. I just didn't know if you've advanced further in it since then or not.
Yeah, I really want to. I just this is for people who don't know, I am actually fucking awful at finishing or even watching TV. Like when I'm watching TV, I'm like, yeah, great. TV's the best, but it's like going to the gym. Like I like it when I'm there, but I never like want to go there. I'm just like a really big reader, which is true. Most of the time I'm like, I just want to read a book instead of watch TV. And so much of my life is watching wrestling on TV that I forget to watch TV. I have COVID. I should be sitting around watching TV, and I watched an episode and a half of something today. Mostly I just read and did laundry. I have COVID. I should be watching TV. I don't know how to
you
relax.
Also read books at a very high rate. You also have several other things that you do.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to shut this brain down. That's my nightmare. But I do really want to go back and finish the series because, like I said many times on the podcast, the series is really what learning about Sam Raimi and the process and things like that. And then the series and how Ash grows as a character is really what clinched me liking Evil Dead. And then since we recorded so late after me and Marcus recorded, we're recording this part, I have seen Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and I won't give any spoilers, I guess, but I will say I did love all the Sam Raimi-ness about it, and I'm really happy that I did all of this research and learned about Sam Raimi before I saw that movie because it made it a lot more enjoyable for me.
Fantastic. Maybe we can put on the extended watch list when you feel like watching horror movies not for this podcast, Drag Me to Hell, which is another Sam Raimi horror flick completely removed from the Evil Dead universe.
Yeah, I would like to see that. I want to know what's going on in his messed up little brain.
And then I guess also for the sake of media awareness and tie-ins, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that a new Evil Dead video game just came out this week. It's a really fun multiplayer thing where it drops a bunch of players. You could be a different Ash from all of the different Evil Deads, and you could be some of the Scooby Gang from the new show. And you get to run around collecting pages of the Necronomicon and a dagger and stuff like that, all to kind of exorcise the Big Deadite, which is played by another character. The other character plays the big bad that they're fighting on the map that's possessing cars and furniture and
that sounds so fun.
Sending other cool Deadites out after them. So this franchise is still up and running in various forms.
Oh yeah, I mean there's still comic books coming out. I think I was looking at solicits and there's a new Evil Dead versus Reanimator coming out, and I know that they've done it before, but there's a new one, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm getting that 100% because I understand these references now, and Herbert West is my teeny tiny little angry boy. I can't wait for the quips.
And the blankets.
And the blankets. The quips, the blankets, the boomsticks. That's what I'm here for. That wraps it up. Thank you for your patience. We should theoretically, knock on something, be back on a normal schedule soon-ish. Who knows? If you want to follow Marcus, remember his Twitter is Abstract Poetic, an E where that 3's supposed to be. Bobby is at Haberdasher9K. I'm at Cell_Cheeks. And then, of course, you can follow the production podcasts at NYD Productions on Twitter and Instagram. And use the hashtag #Spooky30s30 to interact with this podcast. Next episode, I'll be joined by our good friend Jolene, where we talk about the Phantasm series. And I know fucking nothing about that, so that'll be exciting.
Ooh.
I'm Cell Cheeks. After 30 plus years of getting over my fears, monsters just make me horny now.
Spooky 30s is created by Stella Cheeks and produced by Bobby Hoffman for NYD Productions. Our show theme is made by Resonate_music, and our show art is by Lauren Moran.